What was he doing going up there on Monday? I didn't actually see him at the concert, did you?
Sharon shook her head.
Well, you were up on the roof. You should have been able to see everybody.
You know, I don't think he was even there. I'd have noticed him. So what's he saying?
He says John Mulligan's going to meet him up there.
Who's John Mulligan?
I told you, he prints the fanzines. Lives up in the high-rises.
Zig cackled.
John's conned him, pretending to be a member of the Suddens.
How do you know he isn't? Sharon tried to grab the book back, but Zig was too quick for her.
Because he's not the type. He works in the factory, lives with his mum.
But he's a con artist. You just said.
The Suddens aren't just con artists, Sharon. What I'm saying is John Mulligan's a normal. He lives in ordinary land up there in the high-rises, and his mum's got a screw loose, and his brother's in a clink. I've been up there, and it's just depressing.
Well, if he prints the fanzines, he must know something about what's going on. Chapter 36. The nurse was about Bryony's age, with a pleasant, freckled face and green glasses, through which she examined the record card.
So, you're 9 days overdue.
Bryony nodded. She had counted the days this morning, several times over, unwilling to accept that so many of them had passed, then had forced herself to make the trip to the clinic. Since yesterday, things seemed to be happening like a film passing before her eyes.
Forgot to take your pill, did you?
I forgot to take them with me, on holiday. The nurse's eyebrows went up.
That's a bit careless, isn't it? Must have had a lot on your mind. Did you have unprotected sex?
Just once, the night we arrived. It was too late to get any condoms.
Just once? You wouldn't believe how often we hear that story.
Before we jump to conclusions, said Bryony, whose pale complexion was now flushed, mightn't it be just stress? It's only 7 days, and I'm not always totally regular.
Ever been that irregular?
No. Bryony bit her lip. But I have been under a fair amount of stress. How long does it take to get the test results?
They should be ready by 11. You can wait for them if you like. What kind of stress are we talking about?
All kinds. Bryony drew a breath to elaborate, but the words didn't seem to want to come. The nurse responded more tentatively.
Would you like to talk about it?
Some of it I can't talk about. I'm in the police, you see.
Yes, I do see. Here on your card, it says Detective Inspector.
An hour later, Bryony left the Chelsea and West Family Planning Clinic with 2 leaflets, one with week-by-week sketches and details of the progress of a pregnancy, and the other explaining procedures for termination. Termination? Termination? The word rang in her head absurdly. Abortion wasn't something she'd ever thought about, except in passing, as something that happened to other people. But the realization now came home to her. It didn't just happen. It was a decision.
Talk to your boyfriend,
the nurse advised her.
Then come and have another chat with me.
Of course she would have to talk to Gareth. But would he talk to her? And what on earth would he say? Against Fletcher's instructions, she decided to walk home from the clinic. Well, in a manner of speaking, since she didn't exactly have a home at the moment. Or a boyfriend, apparently. But walking was the only thing she felt she could do. She set off up the Fulham Road, gathering pace until she was striding out so fast it didn't really matter where she was going. Perhaps if she walked for long enough, she'd be able to think of some purpose or destination other than her office at work or the shoebox of a hotel room. She slowed as she passed the turn into the Royal Brompton Hospital, letting Macready's presence come flooding back, with all its energy and crispness. think of every day as a week. That was always his instruction at the start of any major case briefing. Did it apply to other kinds of cases? Cases of unwanted pregnancy, for example? Was it unwanted? And what was it? A baby. A pregnancy was a baby. And after that, a whole human being, which was far too much to think about right now when she didn't feel like thinking at all. If only she knew how to stop thinking, to escape the mind trap even for a few hours, something else might occur to her, some new way of seeing things. The last conversation with Macready began to replay itself. Why do you choose to spend your life in this way, facing death at every turn? What was her reply? She couldn't remember exactly, but somehow she'd twisted the question back to him. I can't imagine you doing anything else, sir. Did she really say that? That was a terrible thing to say. It hadn't occurred to her for a moment that Macready was going to die. He couldn't. He took up too much space in the world. He was too busy fencing in the darkness. It's our calling. Those words grabbed at her. I hope you never see the face I saw. The walker's face was always there, somewhere in her head, waiting for her mind's eye to call it up. As Bryony approached the northern entrance to Lucan Place, she stepped up the forced march, as if to suppress any temptation to walk in. But something was working away now in the part of her brain that functioned up there in that building. Evidence. Macready had said it was a mask made of some kind of rubber or latex, a sophisticated piece of work, replicating the features of Maxwell Trimley with a high degree of accuracy. And Aidan had taken pictures of someone wearing a latex mask. The yellow figure under the lamplight was a masquerader. That was the only explanation. How stupid not to see it before. Jimmy must have the enlargements ready now from Aidan's photographs, something she'd intended to follow up on before death decided to get in the way. And life. She turned around and headed west again, back the way she had come. According to the first of her leaflets, the term of a pregnancy was 40 weeks. If she was to have an abortion, it should be done within the first 12, and 2 of those were gone. If she was to catch Macready's killer, there was no time to lose. The first 72 hours after the incident, the most vital, were already gone, and from now on every day counted heavily. It was another half-mile to Jimmy's shop, and her pace had not slackened. Aidan was woken by a battering on the front door. He glanced at his watch, then rolled out of bed and pulled on his jeans. From the top of the stairs, he could see a silhouette through the mottled glass panel on the door. Flack. The battering had stopped, but the silhouette remained there, and Aidan waited, watching its movements. Flack was one of those people who were never still, always twitching and shifting his balance. How he'd found the place was not such a mystery. Keeping it secret was never part of the game plan, and with the Vespa parked outside, anyone could identify it. All the same, this was an odd turn-up, especially at this time of the morning. Most of the punks didn't surface before the afternoon, let alone by 9 a.m. Flack's head came closer to the glass. Then his face pressed against it, creating a mask not unlike the ones he wore on stage.
Wakey, wakey,
he yelled, smacking the glass with the flat of his hand. Give us a minute. Aidan threw on the rest of his clothes, checked the camera and the other essentials in his jacket, and went down. When he opened the door, Flack was sitting on the fence, kicking the garden gate. Got your jacket on, then? He remarked. You seem very attached to that thing, considering it must get you a bit hot under the collar. What's up? Aidan asked. Bit early for visitors, isn't it? Is it? I'd say it's a bit late. But then, you see, I've been busy all night. Haven't had time to get a kip yet. I might do that another night. You don't smoke, I noticed. Flack took out a cigarette and lit it. I saw you in the crowd, up at Highgate. Did you enjoy the show? Aidan stared at him. You got me out of bed to ask me that. To ask you if you want to do an audition. I seem to remember you went out of your way to tell me you were looking for a gig. Vocals and guitar, that's what you said. I'm auditioning for a vocalist. Yeah? I thought you already had one. Kaiser, Flack snorted. That boy is annoying the hell out of me. He's a dead loss. Didn't look like it to me. From what I saw the other day, I'd say he was a true Gorgon. You'd be wrong there. In any case, I've decided what the Suddens need is a Rasta, and I think you might be good in the role. But you seem to be trying to talk yourself out of it. What's the hesitation? I don't rev up at this time of the clock, man. Flack took a packet of white crystals out of his pocket. This might help. He jumped off the fence. I got things set up, so it will have to be now. Better get your instrument. Opportunity knocks. Aidan fetched the guitar and returned. Where are we going? Triangle. Flack set off at a cracking pace. When they arrived, the doors of the building were wide open. It still stank of beer and piss, but empty of people, and with the bar all locked up. The place just looked like a vacant warehouse. Flack went over to the platform at the far end that served as the stage and switched on the Marshall stack, creating an ear-splitting howl of feedback from the lead still attached. Aidan pulled it out and plugged his guitar in its place, crouching to adjust the levels, then plucked out the tune of God Save the Queen with a heavy vibrato, Hendrix style. He followed that up with a camped-up hard rock version, sliding into a rendition of Anarchy in the UK. At the edge of his field of vision, he could see Flack was yawning. Aidan stopped abruptly. You just want a smash-up artist. That's not me. I'm waiting for you to rev up, that's all. Repositioning himself closer to the amplifier and with his back towards Flack, Aidan adjusted the volume on his guitar and started improvising, building up to a faster, fuller sound, then letting the strings ring to get some feedback. He played into it, swinging his body close to the amp to bring the pickups into play, taking it up an octave, then down again, building and building, till the sweat was running off him and the sound was running through him. Finishing with a dive bomb, he heard the slow clapping behind him as if it came from another room. Nice, said Flack. Very. Now give me some reggae. Aidan stared at him. Upbeat? For the Suddens? You got to be kidding. He unplugged the guitar. You know what I can do, man, and you know where to find me. All right, you're on. Is that an offer? Flack made a thumbs-up sign. Then he fished deep in the pocket of his overalls and came out with something rolled up in greaseproof paper. Take a look at that. Aidan unrolled it and found himself staring at a distorted rubber face that dangled obscenely from his hand. You can keep it, said Flack. Let's call it an advance payment. It's worth 40 quid. Work of art, see? Make sure you're back here 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Chapter 37. Aidan was left with the rest of the day to think about what he might be getting into. If he went through with the arrangement, he'd be directly contravening Fletcher's instructions. On the other hand, there were always stories going round in the Met about officers who'd bypassed instructions to make a breakthrough in a case. As for the other sorts of risks he'd be running, they'd have to be calculated, wouldn't they? He pulled the mask out from the inside pocket of his jacket and slipped it into an evidence bag before making a closer inspection. Through the clear plastic, its features were obscenely squashed and distorted, like the face of a corpse under water. He exposed the edge and looked closely at the gelatinous, half-translucent rubber, which wobbled in response to any movement. That was the cleverness of it. It moulded to the features of the person wearing it, moved with their expressions. Who could make a thing like this? He poked at the rubbery edge with a finger. It reminded him of something. That little kid with red hair, holding out a ball made of what looked like old yellow rubber bands. Yes, the ball had exactly that tacky, yielding quality. What was it the kid said? One of the spikers had given it to him. Aidan decided to keep the mask for now and returned it to the lining of his jacket. He jumped on the Vespa and retraced the route he'd taken on his first night in the World's End, stopping at the side gates of the power station and taking a good look over the wall by the railway line. Then, figuring that the boy probably came from one of the residential streets nearby, he toured them, looking for kids of any description. There were plenty about, seeing it was school holidays. The problem was that he attracted such immediate attention that it was difficult to just observe, and a small boy like that would be easily missed in the clusters of kids hanging about in the streets or amongst the furious bike riders who streaked past him. For the third time, he rode around the right angle of Lott's Road without seeing the boy he was looking for. He turned into Burnaby Street, thinking he'd have to get some help from the uniforms, when a football came at him full pelt, hit him in the thigh and nearly knocked him off the scooter. "Wash out!" he yelled, putting a foot on the ground and killing the engine.
You watch out, Spade.
There was laughter as the offender grabbed the ball and took another shot. This time, though, Aidan caught it. A leather football. A Casey. Prized possession, no doubt, even if it was a bit flat. A small circle of boys had gathered. The tallest of them was no higher than his shoulder, but together they were a force to be reckoned with, or believed they were, judging by the set of their faces.
Gives that back or I'll welt ya.
One of the kids advanced a couple of steps, the leader judging by his stance. Aidan studied the ragged lines of the crew cut, the blunt features and creased-up eyes. How old would he be? 10.5, going on 40. "Going to introduce yourself?" he asked.
That's Conker,
said one of the others. Aidan could see why.
Gives the ball, Spack.
Conker's voice had the force of an iron mangle. "Nick's my name, matter of fact." Aidan lobbed it back so it got the kid square in the chest. "You want to learn some manners, bad boy. If you'd have been nice and polite, I might have pumped it up for you." Figuring that it would be worth hanging around with Conker and Co. for a while, he parked the Vespa behind a pillar box to shield it from further missiles and walked over to where they had mustered. "This is Burnaby Street, isn't it?" he asked. There were nods from the two kids who'd positioned themselves either side of Conker like lieutenants. "Where do you lot live, then?"
Up on the estate.
Conker gestured towards the high-rise towers to the east. "So, what's the attraction of this particular spot?"
It's where we ride the bikes, said Conker. You going to pump the ball up for us or not?
"Gives you a pump, then." Conker was instantly back on the offensive, the skin reddening visibly under the crew cut.
Yes, Spaz, if we had a pump we'd do it ourselves.
Aidan took out a 20p piece and held it up between finger and thumb. "Let's toss for it. Either I go and get you a pump," he said, "or I get on the scooter and give you the bum's rush, which is pretty much what you deserve, considering the way you talk to strangers."
"Aids!"
came the chorus, before he'd even tossed the coin. He flipped it, covered it with his hand, and left a suitable pause before declaring, "Eds it is."
Shop's round the corner in Tetcott Road,
said Conker.
Pumps are £1.30. We need a couple of 'em.
"I'm sure you do, man. But if you expect me to spend that sort of money, you might have to help me out. I'm looking for someone. A kid with red hair, ears like this." He gestured with his hands.
Wingnut!
shouted a small boy standing at the edge of the group.
He lives in Ufferdale Road.
The boy heaved a bold breath, then added,
I'll go and get him if you give me £1.
Aidan shook his head. "We already made a deal."
What you going to do to him, then?
asked the boy. Just want to ask Mr. Wingnut a question, that's all. If you was to go fetch him, that would be greatly appreciated. Aidan flashed the smile again. Jimmy showed Bryony into the office at the back of the shop and pulled a chair out for her. You haven't changed, have you? Here, sit down. You look like you'd just done a 5-mile run. 1/2 mile. She dropped into the chair. I need to have another look at those photos Aidan took. I'm supposed to be reporting to DCS Fletcher on this, Bryony. You're going to get me into trouble. He took the other chair, positioned it next to her, and sat down. What have you been running for? I dunno. Bryony took a longer, slower breath. It started out as a walk. I just wanted to do some thinking, you know. And naturally enough, you started thinking about the case. What else is there to think about? She found her voice wavering as she said this. Cup of tea? Asked Jimmy. I'd say you need it. When he returned with the tray, he handed her a plate with a set of prints on it. Since I don't suppose either of us feels like eating cake, he said, I thought I'd better serve you up something you wanted. She grabbed his wrist. Thanks, Jimmy. I promise I won't get you in trouble. He pressed her hand lightly before detaching himself to pour the tea. Can't say I care about that too much, not after what's happened. All that matters really is that we catch the bastard, innit? And when it comes to bastard catchers, I reckon you're about as good as we've got now. They laid the prints out on the table in rows. The masked face loomed forward, getting larger with each frame, but increasingly out of focus beyond the first row. Bryony was disappointed. This wasn't going to be enough to confirm her hunch. The face was held at an angle to the camera, its features obscured by shadows from the tree. Were you given a copy of that fanzine, Yella? She asked. I want to check something. He fetched it, and she laid it out so the Walker photograph was side by side with the clearest image of the mask. Bryony looked at Jimmy. What do you think? Same face, you mean? She nodded. Couldn't say. Then can you say whether this one might be a mask? She pointed to the Walker's face. He switched on the desk lamp and leant in closer. It's possible, he said. Returning to Burnaby Street with a bicycle pump and a puncture kit, Aidan spotted the red-haired kid standing at the edge of the group and went over to him. Wingnut? Is that what they call you? The boy looked at him, eyes screwed up against the glaring sun. The bike he was holding was a pathetic object, its handlebars mottled with rust. Conker gave the front wheel a kick. You can't even do an endo on that, he said. Probably because you got no brakes left. Aidan ran his thumb along one of the rubbers. Completely worn down, see? And your tyres are flat. You need to do a bit of maintenance. He produced the pump from his inside pocket, attached it, and began pumping. I met you once before, he said casually. Over by the railway line. Wingnut was frowning intently. You won't be able to pump up that tyre because it's had nails in it. Now he tells me. Aidan pulled out the inner tube and held it up. 3 ragged punctures were visible to the naked eye, but a bit of patching might have some effect, temporarily at least. He opened the puncture kit and began to sort through it. You told me about the spikers before, didn't you? When I met you on the railway. He kept his attention on the punctures, feeding the questions in as scraps of idle conversation. Where do they live then, these spikers? In Locks Road, number 93, just down there. He pointed, but this seemed to inspire sudden fury in Conker, who threw the bike to the ground and grabbed Wingnut by the collar. Oi, watch it! Aidan moved to pull the 2 boys apart, but it was no easy job. Conker began vigorously strafing the top of Wingnut's head with his knuckles. Just as suddenly, he let him go as if nothing had happened. Aye! Wingnut howled.
What's that for, then?
Conker didn't give Wingnut so much as a glance.
Shut up, that's all.
So, thought Aidan, spikers are a forbidden topic, are they? Or is it their address that's protected information? Thing was to get Conker and his mates out of the way so he could check out number 93 for himself. For the next 20 minutes he worked on the bike, restoring its tyres to a functioning state, oiling the chain, straightening the set of the handlebars. Conker took in the stages of the operation from sideways glances and copied them with his own bike, ostentatiously spinning the pedals to show the effects of his work. "Just about ready to race now, I reckon," said Aidan, standing up. He pointed to the pillar box. "That's the marker for the finish line. You go down the end of Burnaby Street, round Cremorne Road, and back down Overdale to here. See who wins on 2 rounds."
You be in the starter?
asked Wingnut. "No, I got to go." He saw them off, then moved the Vespa out of sight in an alleyway that cut through halfway along the block. Chapter 38. Sharon was taking a whole new interest in manhole covers. There were so many of them, and all different. Round ones, square ones, and others shaped like doormats. Some were battered old things with mud and grass trodden into them, while others were elaborately carved iron plates, proudly embossed with the maker's name. There were 3 just along the World's End passage. She crouched to examine one. Hayward's Patent Self-Locking Plate, Borough of London.
Sharon?
Zig turned and came back towards her.
What are you doing?
"Checking for possible escape routes," she said. "That's where I met the evil hobbits, remember?" She pointed to the high-rise estate. "I'm sure they had it in for me. If those kids chased you into this passage on their bikes, it could be a very nasty situation. It's not as if I'd want to escape over the wall into the school, is it? How well do you know him, then? Johnny Mulligan. Have you been to his place before?"
Not recently. I went there a few times when they started the magazine to help with the printing.
Zig inhaled from the remaining stub of her cigarette, then tossed it away.
Let me do the talking?
Sharon rolled her eyes. "That's what you always say." Inside the building, there was nothing but a concrete space with 2 lifts. They went up to the 10th floor, where Zig led the way along a corridor strewn with cigarette butts and crisp packets, and knocked on a door near the far end. A middle-aged woman appeared and looked at them through thick spectacles.
"Johnny's not here," she said. "Do you know when he'll be back, Mrs. Mulligan?"
asked Zig.
"Could we come in and wait for him?"
The woman held the door open for them. She was small, with a pleasant, rather timid expression on her face, and showed no sign of disapproval at their appearance. They were standing in a poky sitting room with squat furniture and a green and brown patterned carpet, but over by the wall was something that didn't belong there. At first, Sharon wondered if it was a giant washing machine, but there were stacks of paper beside it.
"Do you want some orange squash?" asked the woman. "I could do you a round of sandwiches if you're hungry."
Sharon didn't wait for Zig to reply.
"Yes, please,"
she said. She was actually very hungry. Zig went over to the machine and lifted the lid.
"What is that thing, anyway?"
asked Sharon.
"It's a photocopier. Here, I'll show you."
Zig picked up a sheet of paper with a photograph of Kaiser in his mask, holding the mic up to his wide-open mouth. She put it on the glass plate on top of the machine and lowered the lid, then pressed a button. There was a clanking noise, followed by a flash of green light, and another sheet of paper shot out of a slot in the side. Zig grabbed it and laid it next to the original. It was an exact copy. "This looks like it was taken up at Highgate," Sharon said. "Let's see if there's any with me in. Maybe I'll get on the cover of Yalla. Never know, do you?" They sat on the floor, There were half a dozen shots of the Suddens in their masks, but none of Tuesday's fire show. Zig wasn't interested in them. She was sifting very fast through the pages, spilling them across the floor, then gathering them up again, swearing between her teeth. Mrs. Mulligan reappeared with a plate of sandwiches.
"Ab and cheese," she said. "I had a bit of ab in the fridge. I thought you might like a bit of ab."
She picked up a handbag from the chair in the corner.
"I'm going out for ciggies. Will you be all right?"
"Sure," Sharon smiled at her. "Thanks for these." She ate the sandwiches while Zig continued to go through the papers. "How come Mrs. Mulligan lets all this go on in her living room? Not exactly convenient, is it?"
"Mrs. M's a bit loopy, like I told you. John has to keep an eye on her. But she's got a pension and a council flat, and that's a convenience from his point of view."
"Well, she can't be all that hopeless. These are good sandwiches. You should have some."
"She's quite capable of spending all day making sandwiches when there's nobody to eat them. Anyway, we didn't come here to eat lunch, Sharon."
Zig pointed to the stacks of yellow paper by the copying machine.
"You go through that lot. I'll take a look in his bedroom."
Sharon sat on the floor and began flicking through the stacked pages. She soon figured out that they were all prepared as pages for the fanzine in repeated sets, and that there was nothing much in them that she hadn't seen before, except that the Deaf Row page now had only 2 faces on it. She put a copy in her bag, then stayed there for a minute, cross-legged on the floor, looking round. There was something sticking out of the back of the sofa. A broken spring, maybe. But there wouldn't be springs in the back, would there? She reached up and touched the protruding bit of metal, which had torn through the knobbly brown fabric of the cover. It wasn't a spring, because springs were curved, and this was just a straight prong. She pulled it, and it came out quite easily, a long, smooth piece of steel. She pushed it back in and went to find Zig. Number 93 Lots Road looked worse than its neighbours. The cracked windows were taped over with newspaper, which wasn't such a bad thing from the squatter's point of view, Aidan thought. No prying eyes from the street. He tried the door. It stuck a bit, but wasn't locked. He shut it behind him as silently as possible and edged forward into the dim, empty space. For a few seconds he was confounded by the vision of something inhuman, a monster thrown into glowing relief at the far end. As his eyes adjusted to the low visibility, he realized it was a mural, lit from above, so as to create the illusion of some giant 2-legged beast climbing the stairs. But this place was confusing to the ears as well as the eyes. He heard traffic, then a train passing, and underneath was the constant, rhythmic noise of some heavy machinery. That would be the power station, which had underground loading and transport systems. If he concentrated hard, he could almost distinguish between the background noise and the virtual silence of the house itself, though that didn't have to mean it was empty. So he proceeded cautiously. The pinlight torch wasn't ideal for this situation, but letting its miniature roving beam discover the layout of the place, yard by yard, he made his way around the perimeter. Where were the walls? They'd been knocked out, all of them, leaving just the outer shell. The ceiling was still in place, but what the daddy-o was holding it up? And this wasn't just one house, it was 2 of them, knocked together. Whoever did it hadn't finished the job very well, because bits of broken wall were left sticking out from the sides and up from the floor. Both back doors were boarded up with heavy planks, and the second of the front doors was crudely bricked in. One step at a time, he made his way towards the staircase at the far end. The floorboards felt solid enough, but you never knew. He held his breath when the shaft of light momentarily dimmed, as if a shadow had crossed it. Maybe there was someone up there. He stood still, listening. It was repeated twice, a soft, percussive sound, very light, the shadow crossing. He moved to the foot of the staircase and looked up to see, framed in the centre of the day-lit square above, the outline of a cat. It remained at its post on the window-sill, watching him as he climbed towards it. As he reached the top step, it made a bound to the left and stood in front of one of the doors, arching its back and making a silent meow. Aidan sat on the top step and held a hand out towards it, letting it take its time before making another move. After a few more meows, reaching the verge of audibility, the creature came forward and brushed against his knuckles. "Okay, hot stepper," Aidan murmured. "Let's do some looking around." Becoming more confident that the cat was the only presence he had to reckon with, he explored the rooms, taking photos and picking up samples from the array of spare parts and broken gadgetry. It was impossible to tell how many people might be living there. There were mattresses strewn over the floor in one of the rooms, and the furniture in the other looked distinctly as if it got slept on. As he started back down the stairs, the cat ran ahead of him and into the semi-darkness below. It stopped, a shadowy silhouette sitting neatly in the middle of the floor, and when his torch beam caught its eyes, there was another meow. It wants something, Aidan guessed. But what? This time he did the approaching, and it stayed put, swishing its tail against the floor. The pinlight of the torch hovered round it, revealing something he had to investigate more closely. He knelt and traced the edges of the floorboards with a finger. They were cut across, as if to make a trapdoor. The boards came away easily, creating a good-sized opening onto another flight of stairs, down which the cat instantly disappeared. Aidan stood for a moment, considering the options. If there was anyone down there, they'd have heard him moving around by now, and had plenty of opportunity to ambush, unless they were waiting for him to put his foot in a trap. A flight of steps like that would be the worst place to get ambushed. After counting them with the torch, he made a dash for it, jumping the last 3 steps and getting his back to the nearest wall. He was standing in a small alcove, facing a door fastened with an oversized padlock. Inspecting the keyhole, he noticed scratches in the metal. Someone must have had a go at this, but they evidently didn't know what they were doing. It took Aidan all of 30 seconds to release the mechanism with a pick he made from the wire Jimmy had provided for exactly that purpose. Inside, the torch revealed a light bulb. He found the switch and stood there, taking in the bizarre sight that confronted him. A long, narrow room with a row of masks strung across the centre, all hollow eyes and lurid mouths. Everywhere there were faces, on sketches pinned to the wall, photographed in close-up, displayed in open books, sculpted in brown clay and white plaster. He crouched to look at the floor where someone had dropped a bottle of yellow paint. The thicker edges of the pool were still tacky. The drain over by the wall was yellow too, so there had been some sort of clean-up attempt. Before setting to work with the camera, Aidan took care to replace the 3 boards that made the trapdoor, in case anyone should come in through the front door and see the light. It was easily done, because there were grooved handholds on the underside of the boards. Evidently someone was in the habit of making themselves very private down here, and you could see why. The place was decked out like some personal Rocky Horror show, with its grimacing masks and plaster-cast heads and its array of murderous-looking equipment: vices, knives, saws, razors, skewers, long-bladed scissors, bottled chemicals and boxes of matches. The masks hung up on the line were garish things, suitable for a stage show. But there were others. On the workbench along the side of the room was a row of plaster heads, some of them thickly coated with latex. Putting the camera on the bench, he slipped on his gloves and gently peeled at the edges of one of the latex sheets. It came away easily, and when he pushed the concave form outwards, the face of a man was revealed. So perfectly detailed it might have been the real thing, lifted from a corpse with a scalpel. He photographed it before inverting it again and replacing it on the sculpted head. One of the other heads was coated all over, front and back, with the 2 halves marked off by a fine cut running up the sides of the neck, over the ears and across the scalp. Then he noticed that the line was created by a length of red thread, which was anchored either side of the mould, a cutting thread. When he pulled the ends taut, the two halves of the latex cast sprang apart, and the thread came away in his hand. Johnny M.'s bedroom didn't have much in it. A bed, a little bookcase, a stack of newspapers and magazines in the corner. Zig was sitting on the bed, surrounded by scrapbooks and loose photographs. Seeing Sharon, she shut the scrapbook she was holding and sprang to her feet in an awkward movement that sent dozens of photos cascading onto the floor. Sharon began gathering them up. At first, she couldn't see anything of interest in them. They were just snapshots of passing cars, doorways of buildings, people walking down the street. Then she noticed that the car was always the same car, a little green one, and that there were lots of pictures of the same long-haired woman going in and out of buildings. In several shots, she was at the entrance of the Chelsea police station. The sign was clearly readable behind her. In another, she was coming out of a hotel called the Fifield, and there were several of her outside a camera shop. Sharon took one from the pile and laid it on the bed, then went back through those she'd just looked at, pulling out another, and then a third. "Look," she said, "that's the same place in all these. The camera shop, and hey, here's one of Logan Royce." Zig wasn't looking. She was rolling the scrapbook up in her jacket so she could put it into her string bag without it being visible. "What's in that?" asked Sharon.
Dunno. I'll take a look later.
Zig gathered up a stack of photos and combed through the edges of it with her thumb as if it was a flick book.
"Better put these back," she said. "I found them in the top drawer over there."
"Aren't you even interested in them?" Sharon asked.
"Maybe not."
Zig had an odd expression on her face, as if something had upset her, and turned aside to collect up the rest of the scrapbooks.
"These were under the mattress. Give me a hand, will you?"
The mattress was lumpy and heavy, so Sharon had to hold it up while Zig laid out the books on the mesh underneath. But the sound of a key in the front door forced a botched completion of the cover-up. They heard Mrs. Mulligan come rustling into the next room.
"I did some shopping," she said. "Just a few things. I don't like to run out."
She took the bags to the kitchen and came out again, cleaning her spectacles on a tea towel.
"Our Johnny should be back in a minute," she said.
Zig shot a glance at Sharon.
"Unfortunately, we'll have to be going now. Thanks for the sandwiches."
Mrs. Mulligan put her glasses back on, using both hands to adjust them over her ears.
"I'll tell him you were here, shall I? I'm afraid I don't remember your name. I know I've seen you before," she said to Zig, "but I don't think I've seen you."
She looked at Sharon and smiled shyly.
"I'm Louise," said Zig promptly, "and she's Sue."
Getting out of the flat was an agonizingly slow process of nods and smiles and repeated goodbyes. But once the door was closed, they ran. Halfway along the corridor was a grey door marked Fire Escape. Zig threw it open, and they scuttled down the concrete stairs, their footsteps echoing loudly in the sound chamber of the enclosed stairwell. Chapter 39. "What's with the Louise and Sue routine?" Sharon asked, sprinting to catch up as they crossed back towards the World's End passage.
"I decided it's best if Johnny doesn't know we've been there."
"Well, I suppose he wouldn't be that pleased to have two women turning his bedroom upside down."
"Look, Sharon,"
Zig was still maintaining the forced march.
"there's someone I have to talk to."
"Fine. There's someone I have to talk to as well. Back that away." Sharon pointed eastwards, towards the Sloane Square end of the neighbourhood. "See you later." It was a relief to get shot of Zig for a while, and anyway there was someone she needed to see. If Logan was in all those photos, he had to be mixed up in this, and she could guess how. He must have been asking too many questions. But that meant he might have found something out, didn't it? In which case, perhaps she could find a way to get him to share the information. Since so many of the pictures showed him going in or out of the cloisters, that had to be where he lived. Sharon walked up the King's Road, thinking it was hotter than ever, and wondering if all the people around here were just going mad with sunstroke. As she approached the cloisters, she saw a bloke coming out with a great big cut on his arm, dripping blood onto the pavement. He was talking away to a friend as if he hadn't even noticed the problem. Inside the building, there was a trail of blood on the linoleum floor, and a cleaning woman was attacking it with a mop. Actually, Sharon realised, she was not the usual type of cleaning woman, but a girl about her own age, a dark girl with afro hair who wore jeans under her apron.
"Sid,"
she complained as Sharon passed her.
"He's never happy unless he's got blood pouring out of him."
The splatter trail seemed to lead all the way up the staircase.
"Someone should make him clean it up himself," Sharon said. "Why should you have to do it?"
The girl smiled and shrugged.
"It's a job, innit? Pays the rent."
Sharon hesitated for a second, then asked,
"Do you happen to know which number Annie's in?"
The smile grew wider.
"Annie? She's up on the 5th floor. Why don't you make her come down?" she yelled out. "Annie? Annie!"
A few seconds later, footsteps began to echo down the stairs.
"Flo, what's up?" "Someone to see you." "Sharon!"
Annie shouted, sticking her head over the banisters and looking down the stairwell.
"What are you doing here?"
Maybe everyone in the building was used to this way of communicating, but Sharon preferred to wait till Annie was in normal conversation range before she answered.
"I'm after Logan Royce. Any idea where I can find him?"
Flo held up a finger and shook her head from side to side, slowly and emphatically.
"Don't get mixed up with him, kiddo. Different girl every night, that one. That's if he can get 'em."
Sharon blushed.
"I don't mean I'm after him, not like that. I want to talk to him about a story he's writing." "I don't think you're going to be lucky. I haven't seen him for 3 days." "You sure about that?" Sharon asked. "When there's no used coffee mugs in his room, he isn't there, trust me. But you can try."
Flo led the way down the passage and knocked on the door of number 7.
"Logan, you in there?"
She winked at Annie and opened the door with one of the keys hanging from her belt.
"See? No coffee mugs on the desk, no jockey shorts on the floor. It's just like it was when I cleaned it up on Tuesday morning. Now it's Friday. That's 3 days, isn't it?"
"Would you mind if I have a quick look round?" asked Sharon.
"I did an interview with him last week, and I need to see what he wrote. I don't want him printing stuff he's made up." "Go ahead," Flo said. "Just as long as nobody sees."
Sharon scanned the contents of the room. A phone and a typewriter on the desk. Some clothes slung over the back of the chair. An open suitcase full of socks and underwear on the floor. Annie and Flo were standing in the doorway gossiping, so she probed a bit further. In the desk drawer there was a little stack of notebooks bound with a rubber band, all the same type, with plain brown covers, just like the one they found at Highgate. She was about to slip them into her bag when the phone rang, prompting her to shut the drawer guiltily as if she'd been sprung. Then, without really thinking what she was doing, she picked up the receiver.
"Logan?"
The voice came through a lot of crackling on the line.
"Sorry," she said. "Logan's not here at the moment." "Who is this I'm speaking with?"
The caller had an American accent.
"My name's Sharon. I'm a friend of his."
There was a distinctly suspicious tone to the reply.
"You sure Logan's not there with you, ma'am?" "I'm perfectly sure."
"Well, ma'am, you tell Logan that Rex needs to talk to him. Like yesterday. Tell him if he's too busy in the bedroom to answer my calls, I'll cut him loose. He was due to file a copy 48 hours ago, and the issue's gone to press without it. If he misses another deadline, that's it. Vamoose. Get the idea?"
"Logan's not in bed," Sharon said. "And neither am I. As a matter of fact, I'm looking for him.
Well, honey, that makes two of us. I'm sorry if I got you wrong. You his regular girlfriend?
Possible responses flashed through Sharon's mind.
Yeah.
And you got no idea where he is? Okay.
There was an audible sigh.
But if you see him, make sure you tell him to call me, Rex.
I'll tell him.
All right, honey. Good luck to you.
As Sharon put the phone down, there was an explosion of giggles.
What was that about?
Annie asked.
His boss, probably, seemed to think I was in bed with Logan.
Sharon started giggling as well, but she overdid it, finding herself almost hysterical with the mix of reactions she was experiencing.
Come on, said Flo. Better get out of here. You'll get me in trouble.
Aidan laid out the evidence bags on the table in his room. There were 18 of them, containing samples of the stuff on the floor and the bench of the workshop. Loose pages with sketches or handwriting on them, sections of adhesive tape used to capture fibres and particles from the various surfaces, flakes of paint, a length of the red twine. Leave the forensics to the soccos. That's what Fletcher said. So why was he bothering to do all this? Same as always, wasn't it? You did what needed to be done in the hopes that some part of the system would work right. When it did, that usually meant it bypassed the main man. Aidan stashed the bags in the lining of his jacket. He had decided to deliver them to Jimmy tomorrow morning, since Jimmy might be able to help get the message across that this was an urgent job. He would understand that it needed to be moved along. No senior officer with a pack of obligations to a lot of other senior officers would get an opportunity to obstruct the process. Trouble with the top ranks in the Met was that too many of them had their eyes on each other instead of on the ball. Macready was a notable exception. He had an eye for the other good players on the field, regardless of their rank. Aidan decided he owed Macready one, for being the only big man he'd come across who saw what he had to offer as a detective. Well, this case had the look of destiny. It was set to be the beginning and end of his brilliant career. The real botheration wasn't doing the detective work, it was dealing with Babylon. And now he'd had enough of that. If he had to break the rules to break the case, that would be dead righteous. He picked up the phone to ring Keisha. Chapter 40. Bryony returned to Lucan Place in the late afternoon, feeling seasick from the alternation of mental pictures. Macready in his green hospital pyjamas, Tremlay's face floating in mid-air during the prison interview, the smiling face of the nurse announcing, "It's positive." Positive. Strange word to use. Of course, the nurse was talking about evidence. She was a professional in receipt of positive evidence, and by the expression on her face, you'd have thought this was something she was really pleased about. If only she and Bryony could have exchanged places, they might both have been better equipped for their roles. But being pregnant wasn't a role, was it? Not something you could swap with someone else. She took the 2 leaflets out of her bag, placed them side by side on the desk in front of her, and stared at them. She couldn't read them now, couldn't think about this now, not when the walker's face kept looming up in her mind's eye. She swept them into the drawer, and, elbows on the desk, covered her eyes with the palms of her hands, trying to see nothing and think nothing. 10 minutes later, she was knocking on Fletcher's door, prepared for a confrontation. What she had not anticipated was something much harder to deal with. A reception of kindness and quiet attention. He talked about Macready, explained funeral arrangements, inquired with careful tact about her family circumstances. At one point she was even on the verge of telling him what she'd learnt this morning at the Chelsea and West Clinic, but instead she started talking about Aidan, rehashing her concerns that he hadn't been properly briefed about the case when he was first sent out. Fletcher listened, taking an occasional note with a sharpened pencil, then laced his hands together on the desk in front of him, a signal she'd learnt to read all too clearly. Dialogue closed. "Thank you," he said. "I talked to Aidan yesterday evening, and I'm keeping a very close eye on what he gets himself into. I have to say that when I spoke to him, I had some concerns. He's disaffected, Bryony, and that crazy environment down there is just the thing to provoke him. He's not a man I'd have chosen for that assignment myself, and I don't think he's coping too well with it. He made a fuss about some samples he'd left for the lab, so I checked up on those with Pavan. He's not impressed. Says they're complete rubbish, a waste of his time. 2 plastic bags stuffed full of graveyard mud, completely unnecessary quantities of the stuff, traces of human remains, of course, but nothing recent and nothing outside what you'd expect for the location. He says a properly trained officer should have a better idea of what to sample and how much. As you know, Aidan had a few question marks over him when he was transferred from Notting Hill, and I think we're going to have to be much more circumspect about giving him any special responsibilities." "Does that mean you're going to pull him out, sir?" Fletcher paused, reached for a folder from the pile at the side of his desk, and opened it. "I've talked to the DAC again this morning, and yes, that is something we discussed. Maybe it will help if I explain our thinking. The people at risk from now on are yourself, DCI Latham, and Aidan, by virtue of his assignment. We have no reason to believe that anyone else is in any immediate danger." "But," he held up a hand. "Let me finish, will you? I understand your emotional investment in this case, Bryony. I understand that you're distressed about it, but I can't allow that to influence the way we proceed. Chalmers and I are both satisfied that the investigation is on track. The forensics are in good hands. Pavan and his team couldn't have been more thorough up at Macready's house. They've practically taken the place apart. We've got several dozen police on local inquiries and dozens more working in the area around your flat and Steve Latham's residence. But our first priority is to prevent any further attacks on you or Latham or anyone who risks becoming a target. So we're intending to proceed discreetly. There's no blinding rush. As you know, we weren't expecting you at work today. I'd like you to go back to your hotel and rest. We're organising some better accommodation for you in one of the flats over in Lambeth. They're just completing the security arrangements, and it should be ready for you to move in early next week. In the meantime, if you or Leonie see anything suspicious at or around the hotel, you're to contact me personally." "Leonie?" "She'll be staying at the hotel, in the room next to you." Great, thought Bryony. No privacy anywhere. Feeling hot and confused, she went and sat in her office, trying to collect her thoughts. Dennis's unmistakable rat-a-tat-tat on the door came as a welcome relief. "The desk sergeant told me you were here," he said, taking a seat. "We weren't expecting you back so soon after." "So I've been told. Supposed to make myself scarce till a decent interval of time has passed, Dennis. The recently bereaved are never a pretty sight, are they?" He shut the door after him and sat down. "You know, it's not like that. We're all pretty shook up about it, as a matter of fact. When's the funeral?" "Monday morning." "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do, won't you?" "Yeah." She managed a smile. "Catch the bastard who got Macready. Failing that, tell me something to distract me. My mind's going round in circles. Wasn't one of your children having a birthday? How was the party?" He snorted. "Horrendous. We're still trying to get the cake out of the carpet. I don't know who came up with the idea of birthday cake, especially that stuff with all the white cream in it." There was a pause. "Are you sure you're okay, Mum?"
They told me you were at the hospital when he died. Terrible thing, isn't it?
Yes, Dennis, it is. You feel so useless. That's the worst of it. Fletcher thinks I should be resting, but that's the last thing I want to do. And since I can't seem to make conversation about children's birthday parties, haven't you got a nice normal crime you could tell me about?
No, he said cheerily. But do you want to hear the latest about the Batsy Foot?
Actually, I do. You were going to help them with the local inquiries, so what's new?
Turns out he had an errand down this way at the Chelsea Art College. Didn't amount to anything from the point of view of the case, but I got a bit of a surprise out of it.
Tell.
Well, you know they have recreation classes in prison? Basket weaving and that. Seems Lenny went to the art classes and he paid a visit to the art teacher, Ewan Sheringham, whose regular job is at the Chelsea College. So I go down there, Monday afternoon, this is, and they tell me Mr. Sheringham's in a class. Anyway, they give me the room number, and the secretary, nice woman, an older lady, you know, tells me don't worry about interrupting him. It's only a studio class, so basically the students are all just getting on with their work. So I go up there to the studio, doors wide open, and the first thing I see is a woman standing there, completely starkers. Turns out it's a life drawing class.
Dennis was overcome with the comedy of it, and that was infectious. I suppose you never know what thrills you're going to have next on this job, do you, Dennis? But what's that got to do with the Battersea Foot?
Not much, unfortunately.
You sure about that?
I sent in my report, and I was told there were no more follow-ups.
Just a minute. Let's just get this sorted, shall we? Bryony reached for a pencil. You talked to Ewan Sheringham, I assume. What did he have to say?
Dennis shrugged. Just that Lenny came to collect a piece of his artwork. Sculpture. Apparently, they're not allowed to keep bulky items in their cells. They don't have any storage facilities for the art classes, so if somebody makes a thing they really want to keep, Sheringham hangs on to it for them, and they can collect it from him when they get out.
Bryony was already making notes. So he came to collect a bulky item. What exactly?
Some piece of sculpture.
I said, what exactly, Dennis? Didn't you ask?
Not specifically. I saw the shelf where he keeps the stuff from Brixton. There's dozens of parcels, all wrapped in newspaper, with the prisoner's name written on them in black texter.
Bryony smacked the pencil down. Never mind, I need to talk to him myself.
I don't think C1 will appreciate it if you step on their turf, Ma'am.
You said they weren't interested in that particular piece of turf, but I am. Ewan Sheringham reminded Bryony of the art teachers she had at school. Faded and 40, with wiry hair and cord trousers bearing forensic traces of everything they'd done in the past 2 years. They found him in his office, a little cubicle so crammed with papers and boxes there wasn't enough room for more than one visitor.
"We'd better go up to my studio," he said.
He led the way, carrying a large bunch of keys.
"No classes this morning?" asked Dennis.
"Term's finished."
"Then how come
you walked into a life drawing class on Wednesday afternoon? Third years. It's part of their final assessment." Sheringham bounced the keys in his hand. "Part they all hate most, unfortunately."
"Really?" Dennis chortled. "Can't see why."
"I can," said Sheringham dryly. "In my job, the thing you have to realise is that the kids who come to art school these days aren't interested in art. They're here because it gives them an image. Drawing's just too conservative for them, especially life drawing. They're not interested in art, and they're not interested in life." The last words were punctuated by his emphatic tread on the stairs.
"Then what are they interested in?"
"Image." Sheringham stuck his keys in the first door they came to on the upper level. "Mind where you tread," he said.
And I hope you're not wearing anything too precious. I do my plaster work in here."
Bryony walked in first and found herself surrounded by strange white shapes and textures. The floor was smothered in plaster dust, laced with trails of dried plaster of Paris that cracked underfoot. The space in the centre of the studio was occupied by dozens of sculptured heads and bodies in various stages of completion, and the walls at either end were lined with shelves, neatly stacked with rows of faces, hands, feet, torsos. The newspaper parcels were clearly visible on the top 2 shelves. "Is this your work?" she asked, noticing the fine details of a woman's head mounted on a glass pillar over by the window. He made a sweeping gesture.
"All of it is, pretty well. I told you, students aren't into this sort of thing anymore."
Dennis took out his handkerchief and dusted off the seat of a wooden chair before sitting on it.
"Is that why you like teaching in the prison?" "Did I say I liked it? I don't remember that."
An ironic smile crept over Sheringham's face.
"But yes, I suppose I do quite like it. I sometimes wish I could switch the location of my students. Some of the men in there would make a darn sight better use of an art college place than a lot of the boys and girls I have to deal with here, and some of them ought to be locked up."
"Is that right? What are they up to?"
"Well, their clothes are a crime to start with. That and their hair, and their faces, a bad influence on ordinary decent gangsters like Dignall."
"What sort of bad influence?" Bryony asked. "On his looks, you mean?"
"Yeah. When he came to see me, he'd already punked up his hair and covered himself in lavatory chain on the very day he got out."
She laughed. "So who might have given him that inspiration, do you think?"
"No idea. They're all breaking out in that paraphernalia."
While Dennis continued the questioning about the students and the local scene, Bryony inspected the rows of chalky white body parts. She decided to go straight for the leading question. What exactly was it that Lenny Dignall came here for?
"A life cast."
"A life cast? What's that?" Sheringham turned and picked up one of the plaster faces from the shelf behind him.
"This is made from a life cast. The cast itself is the negative, a mould taken from the features of a living person. Once you've got the negative, you can fill it with plaster and turn out a perfect replica of that person's features. See?"
Bryony looked at Dennis.
"So, whose ugly mug did Lenny want to reproduce?" he asked.
"I don't remember." "But how could you forget?" Bryony shot back. "If you had his face sitting on your shelf all that time."
"I had the cast. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but a concave face is not all that easy to identify. And anyway, it was kept wrapped. I'd forgotten all about it, as a matter of fact, until Len turned up."
"That's too many reasons," thought Bryony. "He's not coming clean. Bring out the teacher in him. That should get him talking. So let's say I want to make a life cast of you. What exactly do I have to do?" Sheringham went over to a table by the window, where a mass of bottles, tins and jars were assembled. He picked up a tin, prized off the lid, and held the powdery contents under Bryony's nose. "Smells of peppermint," she said.
"This is alginate."
Sheringham spooned some into a glass, then added water to make a gelatinous, runny consistency.
"Essentially, you spread this over the face."
He poured a small amount of it into Bryony's left hand and briskly smoothed it over the palm with his fingers.
"You'll notice it's very quick drying, 90 seconds on average, and there's chemicals you can use for slowing that down, so with a face mask you can get a good result on all the details. But for now, we might as well take advantage of the speed."
The mixture was already transforming itself, so it felt like a soft rubber glove.
"Now hold still," he instructed.
grabbing another tin and shaking white powder into a mixing bowl. He whisked some water into that, then began cutting strips from a roll of gauze bandage. "Here, you've still got your right hand free, so you can do the next bit yourself. You take a piece of gauze, dip it in the bowl here so it gets nice and tacky, that's right. Now press it lightly over the alginate mould on your hand. Good. Next one." When the plaster strips had formed an even layer across the inside of her hand, he told her to stretch and flex her palm so the whole thing loosened. He pulled it away, turned it upside down, and showed her. "There, you see? Perfect palm print." "So it is. But a face would be a lot trickier, wouldn't it?" "Absolutely. Nostrils, eyelids, the mouth, the hairline. Getting all that right is a skilled job." "And if you made a mould like this of someone's face, could you use it to produce a mask? Say, a rubber mask?" "Absolutely." "Convenient for robbing banks, eh?" Dennis remarked. "Oh, he wouldn't need to go to all this bother just for that. The old stocking over the face trick would be just as effective." Bryony was anxious to keep the questioning on track. "So, was Dignall trying to make a mask?" "I doubt it. That requires very special skills, of a kind I'd never attempt to teach beginners. My classes were about making plaster casts." "Let's go back to this moulding process." She dipped her fingers in the remains of the alginate, which was now so tacky it formed strings like melted cheese when she tried to scoop it out. "You said Dignall was good at it." "Dignall made several life casts in my classes, but they're bulky things to store, so I just kept his best one. I thought it was a pretty good piece of work." "And you watched him making it?" said Bryony. "Of course." "You remember that?" "Yes." "Then you must remember whose face was getting covered with this gunk, Mr. Sheringham. Whose portrait was Lenny Dignall so keen to collect from you?" Sheringham folded his arms, chin on his chest, and remained that way for a minute. "Look, it's no big deal," he said. "I really hope you won't make trouble about this for the people concerned." "Making trouble's not really the nature of our business," said Bryony. "Go on." "There was a character who attended some of the classes, a Category A prisoner, who wasn't strictly supposed to be in them, but one of the warders was sympathetic and allowed him to come. This was a man with a lot of problems. He wouldn't talk. Not at all. And he spent all his time in isolation, which didn't help. The warder was trying to give him a chance to get socialised, and since the man was supposed to have an interest in art, there was a sort of logic to it. We never did get a word out of the guy, but he wasn't disruptive in any way, and he didn't seem to mind being Dignall's model. I'd rather not give you his name, if it's all the same to you. The warder's only young, and it could put the kibosh on his career if this got reported." "How about I tell you who it was? It was Maxwell Tremlay, isn't that right?" Bryony took the copy of Yella out of her bag and held up the image of the masquerader. "And now someone's going round wearing his face. I'm told by the prison staff that one of these fanzines was confiscated from Lenny Dignall during your class. You remember that?" "Yes." Sheringham had gone a rather vivid colour. "I can see the coincidence, now you point it out, but I wouldn't have had any reason to associate Dignall's artwork with that magazine. I never even looked at it. I know this sort of thing because they have rubbish like that circulating round here all the time, half of it printed illegally on the art school photocopier." Bryony kept her tone casual. "We don't see a lot of coincidences in our work, Mr. Sheringham. My guess is Dignall knew that the people who produced this fanzine would have a lot of interest in a life mask of the Walker, given that the copy taken of him during your class had a centre spread on serial killers. What would that life mask be worth to them, I wonder?" I couldn't speculate about that. Then speculate about something else for us. Who might he have sold it to? Do you have any students with a talent for making masks?
No one I know of.
Then take a look through that magazine, see if there's anything in it that rings any bells. She gave him a few minutes, exchanging glances with Dennis, then turning her attention back to the displays in the room.
Some of these slogans are familiar, he said. Live without dead time. I've seen that on the walls around here. It's an anarchist slogan from the Situationist Internationale. It was all over Paris during the riots of '68. Some of the other slogans are from William Blake. He blazes back into fashion with the students every so often.
Is there anyone in your classes with a special craze for Blake?
Not at the moment. There was a student here last year who thought he was Blake, but he's left. Crazy character. Talented, but crazy. He'd never have finished the course.
Name? Dennis had his pencil poised. What's his name?
Sam Oliver. Called himself Sol.
Sol, Bryony repeated. I think I've seen the name in their fanzine.
Good draftsman, Sol. I think I kept some of his work.
Sheringham went over to a cabinet of wide, shallow drawers and began leafing through the papers they contained. He picked out 2 sheets and laid them on the table. Both were covered in drawings of grotesque faces, half human and half beast.
Rip-offs of Blake's visionary heads, he said. You know about Blake's visions? He suffered from eidetic hallucination, a condition where what you see with the mind's eye presents itself as actually being there. Sol had the same thing.
Bryony was leaning over the drawings, studying the swirling lines. These faces, they look like masks, wouldn't you say?
Possibly. You could say that about all Blake's faces. Exaggerated features, pronounced lines.
Can I take one of these? She asked.
I suppose so, but I wouldn't mind getting it back. I like to hang on to a few examples of the good work that gets done here.
Any idea where he is now, Sam Oliver?
Not the slightest, I'm afraid.
Chapter 41. Bryony arrived back at her office, feeling suddenly exhausted, and fought off a moment of dizziness and nausea. Psychosomatic, she told herself firmly. Just because somebody tells you you're pregnant doesn't mean you have to get all the symptoms right on cue. She sat at her desk and stared at Oliver's visionary heads, knowing that it would be pointless to try and convince Fletcher they had any connection with the case. Not that she was convinced of it herself at this stage, but it was a possibility, wasn't it? The Walker's life mask, though, was a definite connection. She tried to get Steve on the phone, but with no luck, and ended up slumped across her desk, too tired to decide what to do next. When Leonie came to persuade her it was time to call it quits for the day, she gave in and allowed herself to be delivered back to the hotel. Leonie insisted on accompanying her all the way upstairs to ensure that she was safely cooped up. I need to go out for a while. You sure you'll be okay, Ma'am? Bryony bit back the response she felt like making. She'd given Leonie a hard enough time already when the woman was only trying to do the right thing. Instead, she nodded wearily, closed the door behind her, and leant against it for a while, with her eyes closed. At least it was quiet in here, and a bit cooler than her office. Letting her hand drop from the door handle, she found she'd come away with something attached to her, a length of red string. She sat on the little bed, winding the string into a cat's cradle around her fingers and turning the pattern inside out, as she'd learnt to do in primary school. Then she dropped it on the floor and lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Could she really be pregnant? She didn't feel any different, did she? Except somehow it felt good to lie on her back. So good that she drifted into a deep sleep. Some time later she was woken by footsteps climbing the stairs, followed by a light knock on her door. "You all right, Mum?" "Leonie." "I'm fine," Bryony called out. Damn. Now she was awake again, and it wasn't even dark yet. She looked at her watch. 20 to 10. She'd been asleep nearly 4 hours, and going by the last couple of nights, that was as much sleep as she was likely to get. Sleep took away your thoughts and let you forget that something new and alien had just turned your life inside out. But as soon as it began to wear off, awareness came leaking back. Being awake meant being bombarded with painful thoughts, most carrying with them sets of orders: do this, do that, don't forget the other. Do this, do that. Still lying on her back, but wide awake now, she wondered what on earth she was to do in this strange prison cell with its pink-striped wallpaper and its yellow-patterned curtains. Whoever put those things together? Macready was dead, and she was pregnant. How on earth did those things get put together? How was she supposed to make sense of that? "Come back and see us when you've had to talk to your boyfriend," the nurse had said. Gareth's face came up in her mind, staring at her as if she were a stranger. His voice sounded in her head. "So that's it then?" "You bastard, Gareth," she said aloud. A voice responded from the other side of the wall, so distinctly it might have been right next to her. "Are you okay, Mum?" Damn, damn, damn. She couldn't even talk to herself in this place. And now she was crying. She got up and fossicked in her bag for a tissue, but it was too late. Her face was falling apart on her. Her stomach was caving inwards. She was sobbing. The light knock on the door was repeated. "Sorry to disturb you, Mum, but are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," she croaked through what was left of her vocal cords. "Would you let me come in for a minute?" The voice was gentle and friendly, and female. Before she knew what she was doing, Bryony had opened the door. "Do me a favour," she whispered, trying to smile. "Don't call me Mum." The smile was a big mistake. It creased up her face so she lost control of it again. But she found herself held against a warm body. "It's all right." Leonie guided her to sit on the bed. "You're allowed to be upset. I'll make you a cup of tea." She switched on the electric jug and left Bryony to sob freely to its steadily growing rattle. The tea was handed to her in a delicately flowered cup and saucer, so she had to control herself enough to hold it steady. Was that why they always gave people tea when they'd had a shock? It hadn't occurred to her before. Maybe it was nothing to do with what was in the cup, just a matter of getting the nervous system to restore a small area of normal control. "Have you had anything to eat?" asked Leonie. She sat at the other end of the bed. "I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you couldn't eat a thing." Bryony registered the nervousness in her voice. Funny to realise that this was difficult for the other woman, that Leonie was nervous of her and of the state she was in. "There's no room service in the hotel," Leonie continued, "but the Chinese on the corner might still be open. I'll see if I can get you some takeaway. Just do me a favour and keep the door locked while I'm gone." "I've got a better idea." Bryony stood up. "Let's go together. What I want more than anything is a walk. I'm just desperate for some air." They walked up towards Knightsbridge in the deepening twilight, letting the rumble of traffic substitute for conversation. "I'm sorry," Bryony said eventually. "I don't suppose this hotel situation is any more fun for you than for me. I didn't mean to make it worse by... You have a right to your feelings, you know." Leonie's tone was firm. "You don't have to apologise for them.
And as a matter of fact, I was pleased to take this assignment. I felt privileged. People have got a lot of respect for you, you know, especially the other women in the CID. You're the one who's shown us what we can try to be in the job. Maybe it sounds a bit corny saying this to your face, but sometimes I think, I bet she doesn't even know how people see her. Well, that bit was true for sure. Bryony was amazed. But I've been so narky with you, Leonie. True, Leonie said brightly. I won't say there haven't been times in the last few days when I could have tipped my coffee over your head. I'm just trying to tell you that there's another side to it, because I can see you know what you're doing. You've got the instincts. There was a pause. Except when it comes to choosing accommodation. There, if you don't mind my saying so, I think I could have done a lot better myself. They were turning into the Brompton Road, where the lights on the Harrods building shone out against the ultramarine sky. Bryony managed to laugh. You think we should have got a nice little apartment up this way? Can't see the Met picking up the bill somehow. It's a shame you had to come back from your holiday. Whereabouts did you go? Wales. It was cold and wet. So you weren't tempted to go back there? Pick up where you left off? Nothing left to pick up, Bryony said quietly. I seem to have split up with the person I went with. Oh, I'm so sorry. Leonie spoke with feeling. On top of what's happened with Commander Macready, no wonder you broke down. I'd have been a court case. Was it a long-term relationship? Couple of years, off and on. Off and on, as in going out with other people sometimes. Off and on, as in living a long way apart, doing two jobs that kept swallowing us whole. He's a journalist. We had to depend on free weekends to see each other and, well, you can imagine. Course, Leonie nodded steadily. But if it's like that, maybe it's not really a split-up. Maybe it's just part of the pattern you've got into. No, this time it's different. Funny, it started as a misunderstanding, but somehow it got pushed over the edge. He was really angry with me for breaking up the holiday, but it wasn't a heated kind of anger, you know. It was cold anger. I can't get him on the phone, and if I could, I doubt he'd even speak to me. But you have to talk to him. I mean, you won't know about Macready, will he? Or the danger to you. He might see things differently when you tell him about that. He might rally round. He'd probably be on the next plane over with his adamant cloak flying behind him. Bryony huffed. Not quite his style, Leonie. Keisha lay on the divan, lazily conducting Dr. Hook and the medicine show with her manicured hands. Queen of the silver dollar, that's me. Give me a wine glass, a bar stool, and I'm it. Smoky kingdom. How'd I end up in this type of kingdom instead? All on my own 90% of the time. That's what I don't understand. You think I should go back to bar work? Aidan? Aid? Are you even listening to a word I say? Whether I'm listening or not, said Aidan, I'm hearing you. Just like I'm hearing that zombie stuff you got on the turntable. Keisha swung to an upright position. What do you mean, zombie? What's wrong with it? Aidan didn't respond. He was slumped on a dining chair, feet splayed under the formica table, staring at the remains of his meal. What you got against Dr. Hook? Keisha sounded genuinely offended. She went over and took the needle off the record, then stood looking at her brother, the frown lines deepening on her forehead. You know what? When you invited yourself over for dinner, I was thinking I might be getting some pleasant company for a change. But I guess I got to learn not to be an optimist. Don't give up optimism on my account. And if you want to spend your life as a cocktail waitress, I say you should do just that. You should do whatever keeps the adrenaline running, because when it stops, you begin to catch sight of things you'd be best off not to see.
What are you talking about?
Keisha swept up the used dinner plates and put them through the hatch into the kitchen.
What's up with you, Aid? You seen something bad?
I'm thinking police work isn't for me. Not anymore.
Hey! She put a hand on his arm. Steady up. That's a whole career you got going there. Not just some 10-bob an hour job. You got respect, man. You got prospects. Gonna be inspector this and detective that. Mr. Mention. You want some ice cream?
I'm serious, Keisha. I'm swapping tribes.
She gave him a little punch. And I'm not going to let you be serious. Swapping tribes. What you think this is, the jungle?
Absolutely. He smiled. That's where those kids down the world's end are stealing a march on the rest of them, see? They understand that. It's all tribal. There's the law tribe and the fashion tribe and the city suits and the dirty workers. And there's the colour tribes. He held up 3 fingers. That's Pakis, Afros and Rastas. Nobody wants to be in the dirty worker tribe, so they're all going on strike or sticking pins in their noses and reverting to the feral condition, which leaves the colour tribes to do all the dirty work. That's how it's going to be. You think mixing drinks and driving cabs is dirty work? Keisha, you said yourself you've got to be white to get a day job, or a job that doesn't hide you away from the sun in some factory or basement. And there's another tribe, White Riot. You know about them?
Course I know about them. Bunch of criminals. That's your job, Aidan. You got to get them prosecuted.
He smiled and shook his head. Job of the law tribe is to keep everyone in their place. White Riot is only the noisy front line of the silent majority. You think detective work is about finding out what's going on? Man, they go out of their way not to find out what's happening because nobody wants to know.
What are you going to do then?
Going to do some finding out on my own accord.
Sharon wasn't sleeping. She was curled up in an armchair, wide awake, stroking the cat and thinking she was hearing things. Footsteps down below. A creaking noise out on the landing. Every so often the cat started purring like a warmed engine, and that banished the phantom sounds for a while. Zig, in her favourite puffy armchair, might also be awake, judging from her upright position, though her face was buried in the crook of her arm, so you couldn't tell. Sharon closed her eyes and, listening to the soothing noise of the cat's purr and feeling the swell of its soft body as it breathed, she at last fell into a dream. She was walking through Highgate Cemetery. Every tombstone had someone sitting on it, watching her as she passed. But when she looked at them, their faces were a blur. After a while, she realized they were following her, converging into a throng that spread out among the tangled greenery all around. Somehow, she knew they were the people who belonged inside the graves, but they wouldn't go back where they came from because they wanted to see the show. Ahead of her, the Suddens were already on the stage, buzzing into the microphone like angry hornets, and Mrs. Mulligan was there, in the middle of the crowd, serving sandwiches from a tea tray. Sharon didn't want one because she was worried she'd be late for her part of the show, and she didn't know how she was going to get up onto the stage. She tried to climb up the side of the tomb by placing her foot on the carvings, but found herself sucked downwards instead, till she was slipping through the doorway and into the cavern of its interior. There were dead people in there, too, dozens of them, clustered round the edges of the space, their misty faces giving off a soft grey light in the darkness. They were watching something. At first, Sharon couldn't see what it was, but then a stream of light came through as the square hole in the roof opened and revealed someone lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The blood was seeping under the soles of her shoes. She tried to step out of its way, but it was spreading everywhere. Sharon started awake and found herself looking into the wide golden eyes of the cat.
She lay there watching the growing light, on full alert for more noises, as images from the dream kept flashing back into her mind, with the realization that she might have been really, really stupid. So stupid that she didn't even realize someone was actually killed in that fire show, or that they were burning the body of someone who'd been killed before it. Did that make her a murderer as well? She uncurled her legs and sat forward in the chair, looking at Zig and wondering what was going on in her mind as she lay there with her fingers curled around the string bag. She'd been keeping that very close ever since the visit to Johnny Mulligan's. But the rolled-up scrapbook was slipping out, and Sharon made a grab for it. Sneaking out of the room, she stood under the window on the landing and began turning the pages. Loose papers from between them kept falling on the floor, distracting her attention from the densely arranged newspaper clippings that were pasted in the book. The stuff on the loose pages was different. Drawings. She gathered them up, put about half of them in her own bag, and returned the rest to the book, which she managed to replace more or less as she'd found it, without waking Zig. Then she threw on the boiler suit and left the house. Chapter 42. Bryony tried to call Gareth first thing on Friday morning, but again the phone rang out. Numbly, she pulled on her cotton shirt and slacks and prepared for work. Outside, the day was already showing signs of heating up, and she resigned herself to missing out on a freshening sprint round the block. As she was staring out of the window, the phone rang and caused her to miss a few heartbeats, until she reminded herself firmly that Gareth wouldn't have got the letter yet, and so would have no idea where to ring her. It was Fletcher, of course, just checking. So she gave him a brief update on her movements yesterday afternoon, playing a bit ingenuous about the results of the Sheringham interview. Basically, she said, we know that Dignall had a copy of Yella, and we know that he had some contact with Maxwell Tremlay through the art class. I'm intending to make a few more inquiries to see if we can establish any specific connection between Dignall and the Yella crew. Just as long as you have Dennis with you, and get him to report your location at all times. Bryony thought for a moment, then rang Steve and asked him to meet her at Jimmy's. She got Leonie to drop her off there after breakfast. No need to wait for me this time, she said. Just report where I am, and I'll get Dennis to collect me when I'm finished. It was Steve who opened the door to her and led the way through to the office.
It's getting to be the unofficial CID room, this. Apparently we've just missed Aidan. He'd been round here dropping off samples for Pavan.
Really? Where are they?
Already been collected, Jimmy says. Aidan told him they were for express delivery. So.
Steve gestured to the seat opposite him at the table and pulled out a packet of cigarettes.
Tell you one thing, Bryony, he said as he lit up. You did me a favour getting me back on the fags. It's 37 hours now since my last drink.
He smacked his chest, coughing abruptly.
New man, can't you see?
Bryony's token half-smile evidently wasn't enough of an endorsement, and his tone suddenly changed.
But do me a favour. Don't come the girl guide on me, all right? I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like I've been turned inside out.
Yeah, I know that feeling, she said quietly. So what have you got to report?
I talked to Patrick Mulligan up in Pentonville. He's in for break and enter. Multiple offences. Been inside since January. So he's got a rock-solid alibi for all the incidents we're concerned with. His answer to the question of who brought him the Yellow magazine is Johnny picked it up somewhere. Johnny being the kid brother. Well, 18 years old.
And is Johnny involved with the punks?
According to the prison staff, John Mulligan looks so straight he couldn't crook his little finger. Goes to work, lives at home where he looks after his nutty mother, and the two of them pay a monthly visit to Patrick in the Jug. They live in one of those new high-rises in the World's End, so we'd best pay him a visit. I was going to do it yesterday afternoon, but something happened.
He swallowed, and his jaw stiffened. She could tell he was fighting back tears. After last night, Bryony felt drained of tears, and somehow distant from what was going on around her. The arrangement of thoughts in her mind was doing a slow somersault. The copy of Yella that got into Brixton. There's no picture of the walker on the back, no death row page, but Tremlay features in the centre spread. Killer of the month, Steve quipped. Pin-up pic. See, we know Len Dignall had that copy, and it would have shown him there were people who took a special sort of interest in the walker. And he had a special sort of access to him. As a matter of fact, Tremlay was allowed to attend a couple of the art classes, where he had his portrait done by Dignall. What? Steve was half laughing, with a pained expression on his face. Dignall took a life cast of Tremlay's face. The art teacher, Ewan Sheringham, kept it for him, and as soon as Dignall came out of jail he went to collect it. You know what you can do with a life cast? Make a mask. So who would have wanted this little collector's item? Johnny Mulligan. We'd better think carefully about how we approach him. Obvious, said Steve. We go for the nutty mother. Pay her a call on some pretext, like checking up on local bike thefts or something, and you and she get into a nice girly chat while I assess what's really going on there. Did you ever do any role reversal work in your psychology training? Bryony asked dryly. What's this? Jimmy came in, rubbing his hands. You two squabbling again? It's all right, Jimmy, Bryony said. We're just leaving. Anything to tell us? I hear Aidan's paid you a visit this morning. Oh, too briefly, I'm afraid. He strikes me as a bit on the edge, especially this morning. Full of orders about how I'm to get his samples collected immediately, and I'm to phone the lab and to make sure they pick up on the job. Then he's off on his bike without so much as a "how's your father?" Bryony was frowning. Did you take a look at them, these samples? Only in general. They were all bagged up, numbered and labelled, so I didn't like to interfere with them. They're from an address in Lots Road. Would you say they were a professional job? Absolutely. 16 packets, neat as a row of soldiers. That's odd, she said. Pavan told Fletcher that Aidan's last lot of forensic samples were complete crap. Not literally, I hope, quipped Steve. Not far off. 2 plastic bags stuffed full of graveyard mud. She picked up the telephone and dialed Pavan's number. Bryony, he said, in the downbeat tone you'd use to a nuisance caller. I'm sorry, Pavan. I'm well aware that you're probably snowed under. Wrong metaphor, I think. It really is rather warm here. What can I do for you? Bryony hated being spoken to in this way, but her reactions to everything felt somehow muted right now. She stuck to the points she had to focus on. I need to know if you've received the latest set of samples Aidan's collected. They were delivered this morning, yes, but I haven't looked at them yet. Well, could you have a look now? I'm afraid they'll have to wait their turn. We're short-staffed here, and the lab is fully occupied at present, with matters that have been scheduled in strict order of priority. Do me a favour, Pavan, she found herself saying, and stop talking to me as if I was some clueless junior. I have to ask you something quite specific, and I need an answer immediately. Would you mind getting those samples and bringing them over to the phone? There was silence on the other end, while Bryony exchanged glances with Steve, who mimed clapping. Bryony, I have them in front of me. Good. Now, would you mind telling me how those compare with the last set of exhibits you got from Aidan? Completely different kettle of fish. His tone had changed now. I'd say these were not the work of the same person. Thank you, Pavan. That's all I need to know. I'd suggest you give this new set a very high priority, and while you're about it, see if there are any interesting fingerprints on the evidence bags from the first set. She put the phone down. Steve decided to go in chase of Aidan and left Bryony and Dennis to do the interview with Patrick Mulligan's family. As they pulled up at the edge of the high-rise zone in the World's End estate, Bryony for once felt that Dennis was exactly the person she needed to have with her. She'd given him a cursory briefing on the way and asked him to make the running with the first part of the interview, just to put Mrs. Mulligan at ease. They entered the building and he pressed the lift button.
I heard a story about a little girl that lives in one of these high-rise flats. She was walking all day at school on her tippy-toes. Turned out it was because her dad works nights, and the walls in her block were made of bloody cardboard, so she'd been brought up not to make a sound. Ever since she was a toddler, she'd been walking like that. Still, I suppose these new ones aren't quite so high. They made their way down the rubbish-strewn corridor and knocked on the door. It was some time before there were any signs of response on the other side. Then it was opened by a woman wearing bright blue rubber gloves that were dripping with suds. "Are you Social Security?" she asked suspiciously. "No, Mrs. Mulligan," Dennis said cheerily. "We're nothing to do with the DSS. Just your local coppers. Would you mind if we had a bit of a chat?"
"John's a good boy," she said.
She showed them in, pulling off the gloves and looking self-conscious.
"At work, is he?"
asked Dennis. She looked at her watch.
12:30. He might be back for his dinner. I suppose you want to sit down."
Bryony was preoccupied with the machine over by the wall, the elephant in the room, but resisted the temptation to ask about it immediately.
"Will I make a cup of tea?"
said Mrs. Mulligan.
"No need to bother with that," said Dennis. "Just come and talk to us for a minute. Where does he work, your John?"
"He works in the factory down there."
She pointed through the window at the sky.
"In the power station? So what sort of work does he do?"
"Metal cutting. It's hot metal. He has to wear gloves."
Her own blue gloves were laid on her lap, and she fingered the tips of them nervously.
"Asbestos."
"And Johnny usually comes back for lunch, is that right?"
She nodded.
"Then he'll be going out again."
"They're always in and out these days, aren't they, the teenagers? Likes his Friday night concert, I expect."
Dennis pressed on, trying to develop a line of conversation about the local entertainment scene, and was getting nowhere in particular, while Bryony scanned the room. She could see no signs of anything unusual, apart from the photocopying machine. What she needed was an opportunity to look through some of the papers stacked up beside it. "Actually, Mrs. Mulligan," she said, "I'm dying for a cup of tea. Can I take you up on your kind offer?"
"What about sandwiches? Will I make sandwiches?"
"Just the tea, thanks." As Mrs. Mulligan disappeared into the kitchen, Bryony signalled for Dennis to follow her.
"Keep her talking," she whispered. "Try and give me 5 minutes."
She lifted the lid off the machine and found a paper on the glass plate underneath. It was a spread of photographs, not unlike those Aidan had taken, showing scenes from the Highgate pantomime. The paper was white, whereas those stacked on the floor were yellow, so it could be the master copy. Turning her attention to the printed pages, she found they were collated in sets, ready for stapling, and she was about to go through them when she realised she wasn't alone. A young man, who must have entered with the silence of a cat burglar, was standing over by the door, watching her, hands in the pockets of his overalls. She tried to sound unfazed. "Johnny Mulligan?" "What's up?" "We're making some inquiries," she said, "about Yella magazine. You seem to be familiar with it." She tapped one of the stacks of paper. "New issue? Hot off the press?" He was walking slowly around the perimeter of the room, then stopped at the window. Nothing about him, she thought, carried any of the punk's trademarks, and the overalls looked as if they were in professional use. His hair was evenly crew-cut, as a professional barber would do it. He had her in his sights, but his gaze kept travelling across her, as if he were avoiding her eye. "You do the printing here, then?" Bryony lifted the lid of the photocopier. "Expensive toy. Want to give us a demonstration?" "No." Mulligan advanced a couple more steps towards her. It was hard to get the measure of this bloke. She decided to try a bluff. "Thing is, I've been talking to your brother in Pentonville, Patrick, and he was telling us you're pretty much head cook and bottle washer with this magazine." She corrected herself pointedly. "Fanzine, you call it, is that right? He says you write most of it yourself." She picked up a page filled with jagged capital letters and muddy photographs, although maybe it's not exactly written. Cut and pasted, more like. I dare say there's an art to it. John Mulligan took another step forward, so he was only a yard or so away from her, and put his hand on the back of the sofa, his fingers digging hard into the upholstery. She kept her voice steady. I'm interested in where you get some of your inspiration from.
2 teas,
announced Mrs. Mulligan, who was followed by Dennis carrying a tray. What are they doing here? Her son demanded.
They said they want a cup of tea.
Well, it's not convenient. He wheeled round on Dennis. It's not convenient. All right. Bryony moved towards the door. Maybe you and Johnny can drink the tea, Mrs. Mulligan. It was kind of you to make it. We'll arrange to have a talk with John another time.
Poof!
Dennis exclaimed as they got back in the car.
Where did Johnny boy spring from? I never heard him come in. What's his game, then?
Our job to find out. To begin with, you might ring the payroll office at the power station and check whether he's actually on their list. Fletcher was out when they got back to Lucan Place. Bryony sifted through the rapidly growing mental list of follow-ups and called Pavan, who embarrassed her with a formal apology for his high-handed behaviour. Well, I seem to remember having a go on the high horse myself. Forget it, Pavan, she said. What matters is that we don't get this case snagged up in a lot of personal stuff. Steve's gone out hunting for Aidan because it's urgent now that we get his side of the story about those samples from Highgate. If there's some kind of sabotage involved in the way they've changed hands, that's an investigation in itself. Any ideas?
Ken swears that what I received is exactly what he collected from Gunter Grove.
I can vouch for that, she said. I happened to run into him when he was up there, and I saw the bulging plastic bags on the table. Have you checked the locks in Aidan's room?
I've got 2 men over there now looking for signs of intrusion. We're very short-staffed here, but I'm trying to work out how we can get a team up to Highgate this afternoon to go over the ground again. That's urgent, given that someone has been to a lot of trouble to prevent us from finding out what it might yield. We'll need Aidan's guidance to find the correct site.
I don't think we can wait for Aidan to be lured out of the jungle, Pavan. We should get on to this today. There must be a caretaker or someone like that who can identify the location from the photos Aidan took. But what about this new set he's collected in Lots Road?
He's described the place as a basement workshop. The samples are threads and fibres, plaster dust, pieces of rag, and gauze impregnated with various substances. I can't be more specific than that until we have the results of the lab analysis. But the one that will interest you most is a latex mask. Rather a fine piece of work.
Get that sent over here, will you? This workshop. It would be where the masks are made, is that right?
That will be more evident from the photographs, which Jim is developing today.
Bryony put the phone down and sat at her desk, resting her head on a hand. Search warrants for Mrs. Mulligan's flat and the basement in Lots Road. A soccer team to Highgate. The case was ready to move into top gear now, and that wouldn't happen unless she went all out to get it revved up in the right places. But she felt suddenly drained. There was a knock on the door, and Dennis poked his head around.
No John Mulligan on the current factory payroll, but he worked there up till April. Bit of a story.
Oh, yes?
They caught him snooping around in one of the foreman's offices after hours. Turned out he had his own key, but they never found out how he got it.
Chapter 43. Sharon was realising that she'd become someone who knew too much. She'd heard that expression in films and on TV shows, but had never thought about what it really meant, especially as people were always on at her about what she didn't know. In the last few days, though, she'd been trying to avoid thinking about what she did know, or at least avoid seeing how it all added up. First, there was Logan. Someone had been spying on him, taking pictures. Then he'd gone up to Highgate to meet Johnny Mulligan. His raincoat was still in the tunnel out there, and she had his notebooks. But where was he? What really happened in the fire show? Second, there was what she'd seen on the television news. One of the police detectives on death row had been murdered. And when she found the latest death row page in Johnny Mulligan's flat, it only had 2 faces on it, which meant probably they really were on death row, and somebody ought to warn them. The woman looked quite young, and Sharon thought she had a nice face. Detective Bryony Williams. Maybe she should find a way of letting this detective know what was happening. Sharon had been walking the streets all morning, turning this stuff over and over, trying to work out what she would do. She'd followed the embankment for miles, and now she stopped to sit on the wall and look at the pictures again. It was as if someone had taken them from her dream. The fire and the chains and the looming faces were all done in black and white lines, but the vision they conjured up seemed to be inside her head, filling it with noise and colour. She recognised the scenes and the places, and also the lines of writing from William Blake. Did the whole idea of the fire show come from Blake? She realised that she'd walked so far now along the river that she must be at least halfway to the Tate Gallery. She decided that was exactly where she was going. The holidays had started, so she was in no danger of running into school parties. All the same, it was a strange feeling going back inside. She'd walked in here 3 weeks ago in her school uniform, and walked out again as a different person. This time, there were quite a lot of people in the Blake room, and she hadn't anticipated that. It was hard to concentrate when others were looking over your shoulder, and Sharon moved quickly from one picture to the next, getting only a quick impression of the images. Parts of the fire show were echoed in them, but here they all belonged to different stories. In the centre of the room was a glass case displaying some open books. Her attention was caught by a picture of a woman in chains, surrounded by tongues of fire. The picture from the scrapbook was a copy of that. Definitely. Sharon looked at the uniformed official sitting in the corner. He was the same elderly man who'd spoken to her on her first visit. She remembered how nice he'd seemed, and summoned the courage to go over to him. "Can I have a look at one of the books in there?" she asked. "I need to see what's on the other pages." "Which one?" He got to his feet and went over with her. "Dante's Inferno. You'll need to go to the study room. They keep a copy in there. You're a student, are you?" "Yes," said Sharon. "I'm at the Chelsea Art College." He directed her to the clerk at the inquiry desk, who gave her a form to fill in and made a phone call. As she was completing the invented details of her name, address, and place of study, a woman in a bright blue suit appeared, clipping across the floor in high-heeled shoes. She took the form and, without smiling or even looking at Sharon, said, "Come with me." The study room was also full of people sitting at sloping desks on which large volumes were propped. They all wore white gloves, Sharon noticed, and when she was shown to a seat, she was given a pair too. Turning the pages in those things was tricky, especially when she was trying to position Sol's drawings alongside the pictures. In exasperation, she took the glove off her left hand, since it was placed on the loose drawings and wasn't even touching the book. The woman in the blue suit had come from nowhere and was standing right next to her. "Please wear the gloves on both hands," she said. Then her attention focused on the loose page. "Where did that come from?" "It's mine," said Sharon. "A friend of mine did it." The woman's voice developed a hard edge. "I'll have to ask you to empty your bag," she said, directing her to a table at the other end of the room. The whole room fell into an unnatural silence as the woman took the scroll of drawings, then picked up the phone and asked for a security officer. 2 men arrived and escorted Sharon into a nearby office, where she was kept sitting around for nearly half an hour while a succession of confused discussions went on over her head. She kept repeating that the drawings had been done by a friend of hers, but no one seemed to believe her. The woman from the study room said she was going to phone the police, but a younger woman who had come in from another room thought they ought to report it to the senior curator first. So somebody went to find him. Apparently he wasn't in his office, and in the end the police, a man and a woman in uniform, turned up before he did. At least they got a bit of order into the situation. The female police officer took her into a room on her own and asked for her name and address. Sharon used the false surname and address she'd put on the form earlier, and when she was asked her age, said confidently, 18. "Would you like to phone your parents?" asked the officer. "Why?" said Sharon. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Well, we'll have to see about that. We may have to ask you to come down the station and answer a few questions. You sure you wouldn't like anyone with you?" An idea occurred to Sharon. "No, but can I choose who I talk to at the police station?" This suggestion seemed to amuse the policewoman. "Got friends there, have you?" "No, just someone I need to talk to. Bryony Williams. She's a detective. Do you know her?" "D.R. Williams? I've heard of her. She's in a different division. Chelsea, I think. What do you need to talk to her about?" At that point, they were interrupted by the other police officer, who came in holding Sharon's bag.
"It's a false alarm, apparently,"
he said.
"The senior curator's had a look at the drawings, and he's quite happy to accept that they're the property of the young lady here."
He handed the bag to Sharon.
"They're very apologetic, miss. All a bit of a misunderstanding."
Sharon stood up. "Could I ask you to do me a favour?"
"Depends," said the male officer nicely. "I dare say somebody round here owes you a favour."
"Give these to Detective Williams." Chapter 44. Aidan turned into the King's Road just downstream of the shop at number 430. Seeing people clustered round there, he parked the Vespa and walked towards them. Flack was in the centre of the group, doing all the talking as usual, and the girl who'd worn the rubber corset was looking away from him, out across the street. She wasn't wearing the corset today, though the string vest she had on revealed a shiny black bra underneath.
"If I put it to the band..."
Flack was projecting his voice for the benefit of anyone passing.
"I know exactly what they'll say. They'll say exactly nothing, because it won't appeal to them. A punk festival. What kind of a bollock dead idea is that?"
He caught Aidan's eye and stopped for a moment. No one else seemed to have anything to say, but Aidan could see that the girl in the petticoat was agitated, making tense little movements and biting her lip. As Flack started up again, she glanced at her watch, then, as if on an impulse, set off across the road. It would be too obvious to follow her straight away, but he watched where she went and figured she might well be going towards Lott's Road, since she'd turned south at the Edith Grove intersection. He let another 5 minutes pass, keeping half an ear on Flack's monologue, before returning to the bike and going in pursuit. Entering Lott's Road from the opposite end to the girl, he was in time to see her walking towards him. He dismounted strategically outside number 93 and stood there, letting her decide how she was going to deal with it. His guess was that she wouldn't bolt. From the look of her, beating a retreat was not her style. She kept on coming, but got slower and slower, keeping her eyes fixed on his face, and when she reached him, she gave him the once-over before speaking.
"If you're looking for the squat," she said, "it's full. You'll have to go somewhere else."
"I'm not looking for the squat. I'm looking for you. Got something I need to talk about."
"Oh, yeah?"
He gestured towards the door with his thumb.
"Matter of fact, I've been in there. I had a look around, but I wouldn't say it was the sort of accommodation I'd be falling over myself to get a share of. I'm interested in another person that's resident here.
Oh,
That's what I want to discuss with you. She folded her arms.
where exactly were you thinking of having this discussion?
Maybe inside. Maybe somewhere else if you prefer it.
Somewhere else. You can buy me a drink.
She went up to the bike and smacked the saddle.
And since you got transport, you can give me a lift.
Which pub? Aidan thought rapidly as he started up the engine and felt her hands meet firmly round his waist, her knees against his thighs. Not the Roebuck, or anywhere else that was a tribal meeting place. There were several small locals in the nearby streets, but among the regular customers they'd stand out too much. Better to go somewhere big enough for them to be lost in the crowd. He rode around to the World's End distillery, where he'd had a couple of meetings with the doc.
Guinness.
She ordered, leading the way inside.
And a cheese and onion roll.
By the time he'd got the drinks, there was only 30 minutes of lunchtime opening left. But since he'd already broached the topic, he didn't have to waste any time.
Are you the one that makes the masks? He asked. Is that your workshop down in the basement?
Keeping her eyes on him, Zig scooped foam from the top of her Guinness with a finger and put it in her mouth.
Yeah.
Aidan's face broke into a wide grin, and he clapped his hands together.
I like a girl that can tell a barefaced lie.
He took a sip of his beer.
You know, I had a look in that basement, and I'd say the tenant down there is definitely male, and quite possibly a danger to himself and other people.
When?
Zig was reacting like she'd been stung.
When did you go in there?
He made a play of counting on his fingers.
Oh, I'd say approximately 1 day ago. That will make it yesterday.
You couldn't have. It's locked.
He fished in the lining of his jacket for the metal pick and held it up, twirling it between his finger and thumb before he handed it to her.
Padlocks are dumb things, most of them. Hit 'em with a hammer, stick 'em with a pin, and they just give up on the job. But you know, somebody else got into that workshop quite recently and made a bad mess in there. Yellow paint all over the floor. Splatter marks point to throwing rather than spilling. It isn't the kind of accident the regular tenant would have, because he's careful when it comes to his packets and bottles. You noticed how they all is pushed to the back of the bench, lined up neat and tidy. I don't think he'd want to mess that place up by throwing yellow paint around. I think somebody else threw it. Somebody that didn't know what they were doing and made it worse when they tried to clean up.
Aidan saw that he'd hit on something she had strong feelings about, and she was evidently waiting for him to finish to see how much he knew. Unfortunately, he also saw, through the window behind her, a car draw up in a hurry. Doc Latham's car, but with 2 people in it. He tried to keep the focus.
Somebody threw the paint, and you got in the way. I seen you wearing the vest with the yellow cartoon splash. Nick!
Dr. Steve Latham was standing right there beside him, a bit breathless. He coughed into his fist. The girl took one look at the newcomer, and her face clouded over with suspicion.
Is this some kind of a setup?
She gathered her bag and flounced out.
Sorry,
said Steve, taking Zig's seat.
Things are getting urgent, Nick. No time for chatting up the girls.
Aidan's first impulse was to make a rude exit himself, but something about the doc's manner told him that the urgency was real.
Don't look at me like that, said Latham. You've no idea what I've been through the last few days. Maybe I have. I heard about Macready.
Steve nodded, staring at Aidan's half-empty Guinness glass.
Would you mind getting that out from under my nose? I'm on the wagon and it's driving me nuts.
Aidan took the glass over to the bar and returned with a couple of bottles of Coke.
I was told I'm reporting to Fletcher, he said. So what's this about? We've reason to believe that your forensic samples have been interfered with. Really? Funny that. I got reason to believe nobody's bothering to even look at them. Cut the cynicism for a minute. What was actually in those samples? We're talking about the first set taken in Highgate. Well, Aidan leant back in his seat and looked at the ceiling. They should have included a dead crow with a bullet in it, but I drew the line at that. Otherwise, leftovers from the fire show. Burnt rags, ash, broken chain, blood capsules, some discoloured earth.
How many bags?
11. And you left them locked up in your room? No, Doc. I like to hang loose, you know. Why should I care about protecting the evidence? I tell you what, I think I'll just leave you to have a nice whiskey before closing time. I got things to do. He stood up. Wait, ordered Steve. But Aidan was already on his way out. Steve grabbed him by the arm and steered him towards the car. We have to get this sorted, he said, flinging the door open and practically shoving Aidan into the back seat. You should take up kidnapping, you know that. Aidan rubbed his arm where the fingers had dug into the flesh. Where are we going? Jimmy Chapman's, Steve said to the driver. Aidan saluted Jimmy as they went in. If they just call you Detective Superintendent, Jimmy, it will be all cook and curry, man, all pots boiling. He gestured at Steve with his thumb. I've had enough of these feisty bastards. Steve gave him a shove. Just get in there, he said. Once they were seated round the table, Steve tried to take over again. Worst case scenario, he said, is that someone has penetrated your cover. This changes everything. It means we have to pull you out. It's more than my job's worth to let you carry on the way you are. Ah, Aidan responded slowly. But it ain't your job, is it, Doc? Not anymore. I'm Fletcher's problem. It's my job to report it to him. Maybe you'd like to deliver my resignation at the same time. Aidan threw his keys on the table. Thanks for the temporary accommodation. I'll find me a squat somewhere. There was a stretch of hard-edged silence before Jimmy spoke.
Tell you what, why don't we go and look at those photos from 93 Lots Road? They're a bit of an interest you two might have in common.
In the darkroom, the prints were pinned up over the sink and lined along the bench. A gallery of faces whose strange leers seemed to broaden under the infrared light.
To think, said Jimmy, one of these is what Macready saw. Means we're getting pretty close. Doesn't seem like the time to jack it in somehow. But I don't reckon you got any intention of jacking it in, do you, Aidan? What's bothering me is the suspicion you fancy your chances of catching the bastard on your own, or bastards.
Aidan stared at the row of faces and said nothing. Look. Steve had his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched up. We can probably work something out. But the bottom line is, you can't go it alone, and you can't stay in that room. Dropping the undercover game doesn't have to mean being out of the case. I'm hoping we can get a Socko team out to Highgate later today. And you ought to be with them, to show them what to look for and where. I got other things on this afternoon.
What?
Rehearsals with sudden death. I'm the latest recruit to their act. Jimmy made a noise like a schoolboy blowing a raspberry.
So now we know why you want to throw in the towel with the Met. Got better employment elsewhere.
He turned to Steve.
You're a psychologist, aren't you? Looks like you need to push a few buttons with your superiors. Get them to agree to Aidan's star turn as part of the action plan.
Where is this rehearsal? Asked Steve. Triangle, in 2 hours.
Better get a move on, Steve, said Jimmy, if you're going to get the security laid on in time.
You got him to agree to what? Brian, he was quite taken with the idea of Fletcher providing full security backup for an undercover officer taking part in a punk rock event, given his attitude so far.
Aidan's reputation must have had a sudden turnaround, she said. Has Pavan been working the wires?
No, I have, said Steve. Credit where it's due, Bryony. I had a talk with Chalmers, filled him in on a few details, and he said he'd see Fletcher.
So that's why he was so prompt about the search warrant for the Mulligan flat. We're going in there tomorrow morning. Only problem is the shortage of soccos for all these jobs.
Chalmers is seeing to that as well. Pavan's getting an extra team from the Aldermaston labs. Should be here tomorrow. And C1 are organising surveillance on 93 Lots Road. Aidan will have to share that little Gunter Grove place with a couple of men in flak jackets overnight. So all we have to worry about is what he does between now and 4 o'clock.
Where is he?
Gone back to his room. Insisted he had to fetch his guitar and chill out on his own for a while. He's got temperamental all of a sudden.
I'll have to leave him in your hands. Things are starting to move fast here too.
Bryony put down the phone and called Dennis in.
Any sign of that package from the lab?
Just come in. He handed it to her, along with a standard buff envelope bearing her name in block letters. She looked accusingly at the envelope.
What's this?
Apparently, it was dropped off at the desk by a couple of the patrol officers from Rochester Road Division.
Report, I expect.
She tossed it aside, opening the package from the lab, and drew out the evidence bag. Under the transparent cover, the features of the mask were squashed and indistinguishable, but there was a note from Pavan.
OK to handle this. Prints have been taken.
She pulled it out and held it up.
Very pretty,
said Dennis. It was not the face she was looking for. This one was a grotesque fantasy with twisted lips, an overhanging brow, and purple folds around the eye sockets.
Put it on, she said to Dennis.
Not likely.
Go on, it won't bite you.
Call me superstitious, but I wouldn't be seen dead in a thing like that.
Bryony realised she felt the same.
What is it about masks? She said. I mean, children wear them, don't they?
Not ones like that. To be honest, I don't even like the toy ones. I've seen little kids go hysterical wearing those plastic Superman faces.
Chapter 45. Don't you always know when something's waiting for you? Maybe Aidan somehow did know, but that didn't stop him walking right into it. He opened the door of his room, and there was the man in the leather mask, sitting on the table, holding a gun. Shut the door, nice and quiet. Behind the mask, the eyes were working overtime, and the hand holding the pistol wasn't steady. It was a small pistol, quite possibly the very one that shot the unlucky Crow up at Highgate, which meant there was a good chance it was loaded. He waited, observing the eyes and the breathing. It wasn't just external heat causing that forced exhalation. It was anger. Who would be most angry with him right now? Telltale flakes of dried Van Helsing's blood were visible around the lower half of the mask and were caught in the teeth of the mouth zip.
Kaiser, he said quietly. Shut it.
Kaiser put both hands around the gun.
Or you'll get this in your mouth. I've always wondered what splattered brains would look like, though in your case they might not spread very far. You've come to the end of the road, do you know that?
Which road are we talking about?
The future.
Behind the zip, the mouth took on an ugly shape.
I'm looking at someone that's got no future.
Aidan was assessing the risk. Kaiser wasn't convincing in this role, and he evidently hadn't thought it through, but he was worked up enough to pull the trigger. For a reliable disarming move, the weapon had to be within contact range, and people who didn't really want to shoot typically brought the gun in closer to convince you of the threat. A bit of needling might lure him forward.
Makes two of us, doesn't it? Aidan said. What would a man with a future be doing messing about with sudden death. But don't worry, I'm not about to take your job. I don't think I'd get on too well with your workmates. They seem a bit treacherous. Kaiser sprang forward, jabbing the gun into Aidan's face, and Aidan used the momentum to trip him while twisting around to grab his arm. The gun went off as the two fell in a tangled roll on the floor. It wasn't a manoeuvre Aidan would have liked any of his colleagues to witness, but it served. He gained possession of the gun and sent it spinning under the bed. Kaiser lunged again, so Aidan winded him with a swift punch to the stomach. "All right," he said. "Can we have a conversation now?" Sensing that the resistance was spent for the moment, he unzipped the back of the mask and tugged it off. "I think we'll communicate better without this thing in the way." Underneath it, Kaiser was red-faced and panting. He spat, then rolled onto his knees and pulled himself upright against the table. "Have a seat," said Aidan, pulling out the wooden chair for him. "Be my guest. This the first time you've been here, is it? Or have you familiarised yourself with the place on previous occasions? Got your own key, perhaps?" He sat on the bed. "You know, we'd have been better off going for a beer. Wouldn't have got so hot and bothered. There's things I wouldn't mind talking to you about. Sort of things you were discussing with Logan Royce. Where is he, by the way? Hasn't been around lately." "I was expecting to see him up at Highgate." Kaiser spat again, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then gave a dry laugh. "Course you saw him, you stupid bollocking scuzz. Couldn't have missed him." An ugly picture was forming in Aidan's mind. What happened to Logan up there? "He lost his gun," said Kaiser flatly. "Really? Do you think it's likely he'll come back for it?" "You'll fuzz. You work for the pigs." "Oink. What's happened to Logan?" "He got a part in the show." Kaiser squirmed on the wooden seat. "That's all." "And now you're thinking maybe that's the part they got in mind for you, is that it? What exactly did you come round here for, I'm wondering? There are your mates in the Suddens, bumping people off for public entertainment. Maybe you felt a bit left out. So you pinched the gun and went hunting for somebody you could snuff out all of your own accord, just to prove yourself. Or is it more personal than that, Kaiser? You got a grudge against me that needs sorting out? Truth or dare? Seeing you bollocksed on the dare, now's your big chance to have a go at the truth." Sharon got the bus back to the King's Road, having decided she'd rather face the remarks of the passengers than slog all the way back on foot in the blazing sun. She sat on the top deck, trying to think what she could do now. Zig was going to protect Sol from being found out, no matter what he'd done or what else he planned to do. And from studying those drawings, Sharon had a pretty clear idea now of what he was planning to do. She stared out of the window at all the people who had nothing more to worry about than what to have for dinner tonight, and wondered who was next on the hit list. Would the drawings give the police enough of a clue about what was happening? It was the job of detectives to understand clues, wasn't it? She considered getting off the bus, then finding the police station and just going in there and telling them everything, but the more she thought about it, the worse she liked the idea. Everyone in the punk scene would hate her for it. So the new life she'd made would be finished with, and she'd end up being sent home to find a job in the Watford Marks and Sparks. The only thing to do was have it out with Zig. By the time she got off the bus, she'd made up her mind about that. She cut through into the estate, clutching her bag against her chest and rehearsing speeches in her head. This time, she'd have to take the initiative. In Tedcott Road, she stopped to buy some batteries at the little shop and saw Conker doing wheelies on his bike, with an audience of smaller boys gathered around him. As she walked past, he yelled out,
"Hey, Spiker!"
She ignored him, but he cycled up and headed her off.
"Someone's onto you."
"What are you talking about?"
"Some spade come around here looking for you. Yesterday."
He sprinted off, front wheel rearing in the air. Sharon had no idea what he meant, but she approached the house cautiously and opened the door as silently as possible, crept inside and pushed it to behind her to block out the telltale light. But at the far end of the room, sunlight poured down from the upstairs window, so the painted creature was lit up like something on a film screen. For a few seconds she thought it was actually moving along the wall, until she realized that it was something else that was moving, something much closer to her. An arm went around her shoulders, and she meant to cry out, but her breath caught, just as the hand was pressed over her mouth. Someone was holding her from behind in a tight embrace, while in front of her a figure approached with its rubber face smiling in the half-light. "Think about it," Aidan said. "What choice have you got? Either you shot the lot of them, or you go on trolling around under a death sentence, wondering when you're going to get jumped. One way or another, it's all over. So which way do you want it to be?" Kaiser's mouth changed shape, as if he was about to say something that would cause him a bit of mental rearrangement. But before he could get the words out, he was distracted by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Instantly he clammed up, his eyes doing a lightning reassessment of the scene. Aidan might have been quick enough to intercept the exit move, but decided against it. He followed in time to see Kaiser throw himself down the stairs as the front door opened to reveal the figure of DCS Fletcher. It was a full-on collision. Fletcher was not a young man, but his training served him well enough to deal with it. He took the roll sideways and was back on his feet before Aidan got there to help him, while his two officers took possession of Kaiser and got him in handcuffs. Fletcher dusted his hands off against each other, gave Kaiser a good looking over, then addressed Aidan. "This wasn't intended as a social visit," he said, "but I can't say that was the reception I was expecting. Do you intend to vouch for the lad here, or will I arrest him for assaulting a police officer?" You would too, thought Aidan, and make it stick. But there was no point trying to help Kaiser out of it now, because forensics would have absolutely no trouble reading the script of what had happened upstairs. Signs of struggle, shot fired at the wall, discharged firearm with the fingerprints of the accused all over it. "Call a paddy wagon," Fletcher instructed the officers, "and get him taken to the station for questioning. Ask the control office to tell D.I. Williams she's about to get a special delivery. And now," he said to Aidan, "you and I had better go upstairs and have a chat." Aidan led the way, expecting to be told the Suddens' lurk was all off. Funny how in Babylon the stuff-ups were managed with such perfect timing. No contact when there was an urgent need, but just when he was getting the most crucial witness in the mood for some storytelling, the main man rolls up to sabotage it. Interview Room 2 had collected the built-up heat of the afternoon, so when you opened the door you got a concentrated blast of it, laced with the sweated tensions of the day's work in there. Steve deposited a page of illegible scrawl on the table in front of Bryony as he slumped into a seat. "I had 5 minutes briefing over the phone from Chalmers, that's all. And we got these." He opened his briefcase and took out a gun, a key and a leather mask, wrapped and tagged as exhibits. "Apparently he got his own key to Aidan's room. Nifty. Punter calls himself Kaiser. He's refused to give his real name."
"John's a fair bet. According to Vince Telford, they're all called John down there in Punkland, or Johnny."
"Vince Telford?"
"Owns the Triangle and most of the other clubs in this area. So Kaiser's one of the Suddens."
"Vocalist. But Aidan picked up there's some kind of rift between him and the others, serious enough to make this guy an internal candidate for death row. So this afternoon, Aidan got back to Gunter Grove." Steve was talking fast, and Bryony found it hard to follow the ins and outs of the story. "So," he concluded, briskly ticking off points on his fingers, Kaiser should be a mine of information about who the Suddens are, what attracts them to the Walker, how they found out about...
Just a minute. What's he charged with?
Pointed a gun at Aidan, basically. In fact, that gun's been fired.
Then that's where we start.
You can take it from there if you like. I'll broaden it out. Ready?
Kaiser looked the part. He was tall and lean, but without the scrawny look most of the punks had. And there was a certain style about him, suggestive of someone who liked attracting attention. His black jacket was stitched up deliberately askew, with rips in the sleeves and SS regalia pinned to the lapels. The swastika looked like a genuine tattoo, not some inked-in fake. And Bryony remembered Ken Keegan mentioning a character with a swastika on his scalp who'd been hanging about near the lab building in Lambeth.
"John," she began, "we've been hearing about you. So you paid an unexpected visit to our friend Nick this afternoon." She held up the key. "Where did you get this from?"
Bollocks.
"All right, John. We don't actually need intelligent answers from you to make the charges stick." She nodded towards the 3 exhibits. "Because these pretty much tell the story for you. But I'm curious about why it was so urgent for you to talk to Nick. Seeing you evidently had a pretty smooth covert operation going, getting in and out of his room, intercepting his forensic dispatches, tracing his movements. Why would you expose yourself like that?"
Kaiser was smirking, but the lines on his face conveyed more stress than amusement.
"I'm sure you know what I mean by exposing yourself," said Bryony. "Because you seem to have blown your own cover now, haven't you?" She held up the mask. "Can't hide behind this any more." She glanced at Steve, signalling over to you. Steve predictably started by lighting a cigarette. He even blew a couple of smoke rings, then laughed.
Bit of a performer myself, John, if you don't mind my saying so. Though I don't suppose I could compete for your job. Vocals, is that right? What tune you sing this to?
"Down in the dark satanic mills, where the wheels keep turning over iron grills, don't look now, you'll never see how, London's invisible machinery drills."
Kills, said John. Kills, not drills.
Steve snapped his fingers ostentatiously.
"Of course! I knew I'd made a blunder there somewhere. Kills! You'd be keen to get that message across correctly, I suppose, being a group that's decided to call themselves Sudden Death. Never miss an opportunity to push that point, do you, John? Is that because it's all a bit of a bluff?" He stopped, fussily rearranging the objects on the table. "This wouldn't be your own pistol, I don't suppose. It's an American Colt, not the kind of thing you'd easily get in London. So my guess is you pinched it from someone else. See, there's a difference of opinion about you lot amongst our lot. There are some cops who would look at you and think, he's just a fashion plate. Wouldn't know a stormtrooper from a garden gnome if it weren't for the difference in the cut of the boots. And as for all that deafer nonsense, he'd be scared shitless if anyone offered him a tour through the morgue. That's what some people think."
"Some people are brain dead," said Kaiser. "They don't think, they just talk." He made a clap-trapping gesture with his hand. "OK, Kaiser John, what would you like to do with those people?"
"I wouldn't be bothered with them. They think they're in control,
But that don't mean nothing. They don't control us. We're out of control, and there's nothing they can do about it." Bryony cut in swiftly, holding up the key. "Where'd you get this from, Kaiser?"
Friend of mine makes them."
"A friend who cuts keys? That'd be Johnny Mulligan, I should think. Got a collection of them, have you?"
Couple of 100.
"So where'd you get the originals from?" He shrugged.
People are careless with their keys. They leave them on the windowsill, or the desktop, in their coat pocket, under the doormat.
"I get the picture," she said. "I think you got this from the Lambeth Labs. How did you manage that?" There was a hint of a smile. bloke in there keeps them on his desk. And in this hot weather, he likes the window open. When he goes out, he just takes the keys he needs and leaves the rest sitting there. There's nothing that's easier to hook than a set of keys, if you've got a rod that's long enough. Easy to put 'em back as well, so he's got no idea they've been touched. Then you just follow the bloke around a bit, tail him in his little green car, and he shows you all the places you can get into. Bryony felt sick. It had been that easy to get into Macready's house. Easier after the security locks had been installed than it was the first time, when they had to use the little bathroom window. Steve took over. "So, you've got transport?" The smile was broader now. Kaiser John was starting to enjoy this. "There's plenty of second-hand car dealers. You get their keys, you can have a lend of any car you want." "So you're the driver?" Kaiser nodded. Suddenly changing his posture and his tone, Steve came in aggressively. "What you're describing is a highly organised operation. Nobody would engage in something like that without a purpose. Any idea what that would be?" Kaiser turned his head away and looked at the wall, but there was no mistaking the flush of anger that rose through his neck and up the side of his face. "No idea then, Kaiser John?" Steve was taunting him. "No idea what it's all for?" "You think I got no idea? I know!" He was standing now, drumming at his own chest with his index finger, and the voice that surged out of him was at a pitch Bryony had never heard before. "I know!" Chapter 46. There was no choice but to terminate the interview. Kaiser was making noise, not words, and the effect at close range was intolerable. Since it was now after 6, they got him put away for the night and headed for the canteen, where the queue was longer than usual, even for a Friday night. The place was filled with animated talk. "Something's afoot," said Steve. Bryony was looking round. "A lot of these aren't regular staff. Looks like they've been drafted in, doesn't it? Chalmers must have been moving fast since you talked to him. I'm impressed." By the expression on his face, it was clear Steve took that as a compliment to himself rather than the DAC, but maybe he'd earned it anyway. Something was indeed afoot. Chalmers and Fletcher had called a major briefing to address the CID team, and the 36 plainclothes officers drafted in for a series of operations tomorrow. The only person missing was Aidan, who had been debriefed by Fletcher after the rehearsal and was now ensconced at Gunter Grove with a small squad of protection officers. Fletcher's opening summary indicated that something had turned his thinking around and had brought him up to speed very smartly. Kaiser's run-in with the DCS couldn't have been better timed. It had served to shift the focus where it should have been all along, with the Suddens. But there was now crucial evidence from Pavan. The Sockos had found human blood in the earth under the Thompson Mausoleum at Highgate, where the sudden death fire show had taken place last Tuesday. "It's recent," said Pavan, "and in quantities that would suggest fatal blood loss in the victim. The splatter pattern against the walls is suggestive of arterial spurting, but the situation is confused by the presence on the scene of stage blood." He held up a brown glass bottle. "Van Helsing's capsules." There was a muted laughter from some parts of the room. "Far from a joke, I'm afraid. There is absolutely no doubt that a murder was committed on this site, and we have the weapon, a steel bicycle spoke, of the type used on Commander Macready. The indications are that the body was subsequently incinerated, leaving fragments of charred bone in the same area as the blood." Fletcher took over again. "Which brings us to the question of the likely victim. Aidan's guess is that it may be a journalist, a Mr. Logan Royce, who works for a New York music magazine called Beaten Tracks. Aidan was aware that Royce was making a few pertinent inquiries of his own into the activities of this cult, and we've ascertained that he hasn't been at his place of residence the cloisters in Sloane Avenue, since last Monday. He smiled. I know some of you have had a very busy afternoon, but you'll be glad to see that this is coming together.
Congratulations, said a sarcastic voice in Bryony's head. The busy afternoon, he explained, had been a run-up to a succession of coordinated operations to be set in train overnight, ready for the next public appearance by the Suddens at 2:00 tomorrow in Highgate. The most disturbing information from Aidan was that there was talk at the rehearsal of a live deaf act.
That is a very sinister expression, in the light of what we've found out in the last 24 hours. Now, we've considered the options. Fletcher exchanged glances with Chalmers. A preventive strategy would be the standard approach in a situation where there would be high risk to the public or to an individual. So if we can't locate the victim before the event, we have to be prepared to intercept the intended action. There were murmurings around the room, and some hands were raised, but Fletcher pressed on. Aidan says there's gossip about the use of underground access routes by this group, and he's sure that's how they made their entrances for the last Highgate concert. The Thompson Mausoleum, which they used as a stage, has an inside staircase leading to the catacombs under the western end of the cemetery. We know our suspects have been using an underground route, and the tunnels would be an obvious place to hold someone in captivity. So that's where we're concentrating our attention, with the assistance of the Highgate police. It's not an easy job, because cave-ins can create cells blocked off from the rest of the passageways. A flurry of questions ensued, most of them going back over points Bryony was already familiar with. But there was one, from someone in the group she'd identified as the C1 contingent, that raised a concern she'd been wrestling with.
So, if our undercover officer has been sprung by one of this group, how can we assume that the other members aren't also in the know?
Short answer is, we don't assume anything, said Chalmers. But I'll ask Steve Latham to explain our thinking on that one.
Steve reported on some background he'd got from Aidan about the jealousy between the key players in the Suddens and Kaiser's position as the one who could get pushed out or worse.
So, Kaiser had his own motives for tracking Aidan, and it is possible the others are not aware of the undercover operation.
However, if the rest of the group do know about it, they might have chosen Aidan for their next victim. They might be trying to lure him into a trap.
What they don't know is that Kaiser's blown the gaff. Aidan's on full alert and he's got a backup team primed for whatever might happen.
No, Bryony thought. This doesn't add up. But she couldn't see her way around all the twists in it right now, in this hot, crowded room. Kaiser's crooning act had started a headache that was getting worse by the minute. Chalmers took over from Fletcher for the next stage of the briefing. The Highgate operation, he said, would be executed with two others, full searches at 93 Lots Road and of the Mulligans' flat in the World's End estate, as the residences of people known to be associated with the group. The searches were timed to coincide with the concert while the suspects were absent, so as to avoid putting them on the alert.
You know how they got hold of this?
Bryony pushed Kaiser's duplicate key across the desk to Pavan. Pavan responded with raised eyebrows, and she turned wearily to Steve.
You tell him.
The three of them were in her office taking stock of the new developments. As Steve dropped the little bombshell about Ken Keegan, Bryony was trying to get her aching head around some of the immediate implications, but Pavan did it for her.
This means all the locks to which the Sockos had keys are worthless. More than that, they're convenient access points. You two will have to move hotels tonight.
I'm not doing that, Bryony burst out. I'm just not bloody doing it.
Aside from the chore of packing up her things again and moving to another little room with equally useless locks and keys, the Fifield Hotel was the place Gareth would try to contact her once he got her letter. Another stuff-up in that direction was all she needed. "I'm not moving either," Steve said. "Since they've turned on the tap from the C1 staffing pool, they can send someone over to sit on the stairs overnight. I've had it with this protection game. Every single advance that's been made in this case has been our work or Aiden's." He shot a glance at Bryony. "And every step we've taken has involved some ridiculous square dance with the restrictions that have been placed on us." There was a brisk tap on the door, and Fletcher poked his head around. "Here we go again," muttered Steve. "Arrangements for tomorrow," said Fletcher. "We don't want you two traipsing around the jungle up there in Highgate. Far too risky. You'll be needed here in any case, for the searches. I'll go through the details with you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, in my office." The door shut again, as Steve made throat-grasping signs with his hands. Pavan stood up. "I'm sorry. I feel I must take responsibility for this situation. I'll talk to Chalmers about the security arrangements for tonight." "This isn't your fault, Pavan," said Bryony. "Ken wouldn't be the only person in CID who's careless with his keys, and no doubt someone will be tearing a strip off him for it soon enough. There's just a problem with the whole way we operate in the Met." "Is that all?"
The ironic half-smile was restored to Pavan's face. "It's why McCready was unique," Bryony carried on. "He managed to make the system work for him, not the other way round. You know, if things go on this way, I could see us losing that battle altogether in another 5 years. We'll just be cogs in the machine." Sharon knew exactly where she was. They'd taken her down into the basement, through Sol's workshop, and down again into the passage under the street. Then she'd heard the lift coming up from below, and the heavy clanking as it stopped. She was pushed inside. The lift was set in motion again, and she felt herself going deep down. She'd ripped off the blindfold, but what could she see? Shouts brought the echo of her own voice back to her. Chapter 47. It was a bad night. The headache raged, and in the small hours Bryony had to make her way past 2 security officers to go and vomit in the little bathroom at the other end of the landing. After that she slept for a while, but sleep was the worst of it, because the walker's face found its way into her dreams. At one point she jolted awake with a distinct sense that there was someone in the room with her, watching and breathing. She lay watching the light grow till she could just about call it day, then dressed and announced to the men outside her door that she was going for a walk if they would care to join her. They did, at a not too discreet distance, so she felt hemmed in and self-conscious, unable to take any pleasure in the early morning. Since the only benefit was routine exercise, she stepped up the pace, at least getting some amusement from the heavy-footed echo as she took unexpected corners. At 7, she steered her way back towards the hotel, thinking that it was 8 in Paris, and wondering what time the mail was delivered in Gareth's apartment building. She pictured the place, with its spiral staircase, and the set of polished wooden mailboxes by the entrance. Maybe he would get up late, so she would have to go to work before she heard from him. Maybe she wouldn't hear from him. He could have found someone else already. Someone who perhaps had been in the background all along. Was that why he let her go so easily? Perhaps it just wasn't meant to be, because it would never fit in with her calling. At 10 to 8, she gave up staring at the phone in her room, grabbed her handbag and knocked on Leonie's door. Leonie had the heavy-eyed look of someone who'd slept in. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't realise what time it was. Zonked out." She ran a hand through disorderly hair. "Guess I'd better get myself into gear. You look ready to go. Did you sleep okay?" "Yep," said Bryony. "You didn't, did you?" "Nope." Neither of them wanted to pursue that conversation any further, in the presence of the 2 security officers, who tailed them as they walked to Lucan Place. Bryony's meeting with Fletcher was mercifully short,
since he was preparing to leave for Highgate and had many things on his mind. His main concern was timing.
We've got extra soccos drafted in, but not enough for 2 separate teams down this way. So Lots Road and the flat and the estate will have to be done consecutively. In any case, Pavan thinks we're better off with the same team on both. If the shenanigans up in Highgate are due to start at 2 p.m, we can assume the participants will have left this area by 1:30. Let's say the earliest you can go into the Mulligan flat is 1:45. Our priority is finding the weapon used on Macready. But obviously, we're after any evidence that links these crazies to his murder.
Thanks for that advice, she thought. Just how basic could you get at an advanced stage of a difficult case? She returned to her office and shut the door, feeling desperately in need of some time to herself. More than half her mind was still on Gareth. If only she could talk to him. Looking at her watch, she reassured herself that it was Saturday morning after all, when most people got up a bit later. He probably hadn't collected his mail yet, and when he did, he'd surely try her at work if the people at the hotel told him she'd left. She got out her notes and tried to concentrate. Something from the briefing yesterday was nagging at her. Something that had struck a wrong note with her, but she couldn't remember what. She reached mechanically for the unopened mail, thinking that if she went through a few routine documents, the sheer boredom of it might provoke her mind into a re-engagement with the tangle of issues that had come up. As she pulled a buff envelope towards her, the phone rang.
Bryony? Just wanting to be sure you're okay.
I'm fine, really, thanks, Leonie. She wondered if her pulse could be heard on the other end of the line, but managed to carry through a brief conversation about Leonie's role in the day's arrangements. The moment she hung up, it rang again. Bryony. Gareth. I got the letter, just now.
Oh, she said stupidly. Well, I was wondering why...
Look, we need to talk.
There was a pause.
Bryony?
Say something, Bryony told herself, but the words were sabotaged by all the excess heartbeat.
I only got back last night, said Gareth. I stayed in Wales for the rest of the week, trying to... Well, anyway, I went to Dolgellau and came back down along the coast. Yesterday I actually got to walk on a sunny beach.
Sounds nice, she said flatly.
It was bloody miserable. I realised... Well, let's not go into that now. How are you? Are you all right, Bry?
Not really. Her lip was trembling uncontrollably now. A lot's happened.
Listen, I'm coming over. I'll get on a plane and I'll be there by tonight. Don't make a dinner date with anybody else, will you? I'll come to your hotel at 7. After he'd disconnected, she stayed there for a minute, listening to the dial tone, then the beeps, letting the tears flow freely, but feeling an extraordinary lightness come over her at the same time. She went to the bathroom to splash her face and smiled absurdly at herself in the mirror. The world had changed, and everything was going to be all right. Back at her desk, she tore open the buff envelope, her mind taken up with a mental replay of every word Gareth had said, complete with the telling pauses, the gentle intonations. Dear Detective Inspector Williams. The hand-printed words on the note she was holding stared back at her as if they were written in another language. Before her mind was able to process them, she had registered that the page was torn from the message pad at the front desk, and that the other contents of the envelope were most definitely not a report. She called Dennis in and handed him the note. "What do you make of that?" He seated himself and took his time considering it, while Bryony stared at the first of the drawings. It was like looking through a window into someone's dream. The picture was small enough to fit on the page of an A4 sketch pad, but it captured a large-scale scene. Swirling lines of black, white and grey created a landscape dominated by 2 towers rising out of a building that looked like a cathedral, with elaborately shaped windows set high above the ground. But the ground was only a thin layer, covering another world beneath, where there were passages and caves belching fire. "Down in the dark satanic mills," ran the caption underneath. She glanced at Dennis, who was going along the edge of the note with his thumb, as if he were checking a shopping list. "So, this happened yesterday," he said.
"Yesterday?"
"Well, that's the date they've put on here. Funny sort of story, isn't it? What did they think she was doing? Pinching their artworks?" As he read out the key points in the note, Bryony registered them quite clearly. He turned the sheet over. "There's an address here. Sharon Smith, 143A, Imperial Road. Want me to go down there?"
"Yes. If you find her, bring her in straight away. Try to keep on the right side of her. Take Leonie with you. She's good at being nice to people." When he'd gone, she returned to the drawings with new concentration, comparing them with the page of sketches she'd taken from Sheringham's studio. They were definitely in the same style, and it was no wonder even someone at the Tate could have mistaken them for Blake originals. She laid them out in rows on the desk, then began shuffling them around. There was a sequence to these. The towering building, with its subterranean passages, featured in the first 3, but there was a progression. Figures were added in the second and third. Human bodies rising and falling between the levels, with pieces of chain attached to their wrists and ankles, and tongues of flame leaping around them. Down in the dark satanic mills. Of course, Satanic Mills was what William Blake called the factories. The towers were chimneys, and this was a factory, not a church. It was Lots Road Power Station. She lined up the next 3 drawings, which she could now see were parts of the underground world closer up. A pattern of tunnels and caves spread vertically as well as horizontally through the space. Inside the tunnels were more figures, beasts with wings and savage faces. In the central picture, 2 of the creatures dominated the scene and were surging forward out of a cave with vast, snarling mouths. "Active evil is better than passive good," was inscribed over the entrance to the cave. Passages leading off on either side of this matched up with the edges of the drawings on the left and the right, so they actually made a continuous strip. To the right, the passage connected with a vertical shaft in which a cage was suspended. Faces were visible behind the bars, each a mask of terror. There were faces in the third picture too, but these were different. They belonged to a trio of full-length figures, recognisably punks by the cut of their hair and the clothes, but cleverly rendered in the style of Blake. It was the last group of drawings that prompted her to pick up the phone again. "Steve, something you have to see." She laid the images side by side. On the left, it was the walker under the lamp-post as he appeared in yellow, but with the features brought out in sharp, insinuating detail. In the central picture, the figure had come closer, surrounded by flames. It had giant black wings and held a spear in its raised hand. Underneath were the words, "Angel of Death." On the right, the angel was standing over a crouched figure, about to strike. By 11, Aidan was crawling the walls. He'd been cooped up in the Gunter Grove room since 7 o'clock last night, under close guard. A trip to the Roebuck, he was told, was out of the question. This meant he had no chance of picking up on the tribal intelligence about the show, because Flack had left it even later than usual to get the word around about where and when the next breakout, as he called it, was happening. He was very confident of his following, that lad.
Passing the officer outside his door with a thumbs-up sign, Aidan went through to the bathroom to find it was already occupied by another officer, busy with his electric razor. "Sorry," said the man, switching off the razor and finger-tipping his shiny jaw. He unplugged and turned to Aidan. "All yours." Funny how the Smoothies always said sorry when they invaded your territory. Aidan grimaced at himself in the bathroom mirror. Then, using his own razor to chop some more cavities in his hair, he was getting to like this look. "I'm leaving in 10 minutes, he announced as he came out of the bathroom. "You can't," said the smooth man, who was evidently the one in charge of the Little Gunter Grove contingent. "Departure time from here is 12:45 p.m. "If that's when you're leaving," said Aidan, "fine with me. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. He collected his things in the bedroom as the man talked earnestly into a two-way radio. Chapter 48. Dennis and Leonie returned with the news that Sharon Smith's address actually corresponded to the location of the Sands End gasworks. Steve had been on the phone to the Tate Gallery, while Bryony talked to the officers from Rochester Road Division who had delivered the package. But the story from both ends was thin. "It's the usual problem. Lazy observation," said Steve. "We could probably get more out of them in a face-to-face discussion. You know, take them back through the whole scenario." "We don't have time." Bryony was staring at the spread of drawings, which for all their complexity were spelling something out to her that was so obvious it had blindsided the lot of them. They had some idea of what was being planned. They had an exact idea of when, but where? "I have a feeling that a big mistake's been made." "Not by us," he quipped immediately. "Maybe not, but we should have picked it. That question last night about whether the rest of the Suddens might have seen through Aidan's cover. You said if they do know, they'll be trying to lure him into a trap. But what they won't know is that he's got a backup team primed to spring them." "I don't think I put it quite like that, but yes. What are you getting at?" "Think about it, Steve. If they've rumbled him, they've been ahead of us all along. Why wouldn't they know there's a bloody great sting operation organised around him? Tell me why they wouldn't at least guess that." "Quite possibly they would. I still don't get what you're on about." But even as he finished the sentence, she could see it was dawning on him. "And if they did," she said, "they might use Aidan to decoy the bloody great operation. You think that's what's happening? Why?" "Do you know anything about William Blake?" "Enough to know where the Suddens get their best lines from." "Then you know what they mean by the dark satanic mills." "Factories. The industrial world. #1 enemy of all good radicals." "Not just any factories, Steve. This is the Lots Road power station." She pointed to the first set of images. "It's got underground transport tunnels. 93 Lots Road would be here, right opposite the factory. So this basement Aidan went into could be connected to the tunnels, which is exactly what this next drawing suggests. There are people trapped down there, Steve." "In something that looks like a lift shaft. There's very likely one of those under the power station." "This is the Suddens' home territory." Bryony was warming to her own convictions. "The world's end. This is where they're planning their big live death act. And Aidan's being used to draw C1 and all their manpower off on a hiding to nothing. It's 11 o'clock, Steve. Assuming he hasn't been misled about the time as well, we've got 3 hours to head this off and practically no resources." "He won't have been misled about the time. If you're right, they'll want the decoy time for synchronicity. And they'll want you and me left without an army of bodyguards." "So one of us is supposed to be the highlight of the live death act?" "Or both." Steve was rubbing the top of his scalp vigorously, causing his wiry hair to stand on end. "We'd better watch our step. Before we go galloping off into the wilds of the world's end, we need more information." He knocked on his forehead. "Think, think, think." They both sat for a minute, doing just that.
We're the bait, said Steve. They know about us. They've been following our movements. They know what cars we get around in, and they'll be aware that we're here. If this is the opportunity they were hoping for, then they'll come to us. Active evil to our passive good.
Then they've mistaken our style, haven't they?
Bryony's eye kept being drawn to the image of the walker, raising his spear at the hunched figure whose face was hidden.
We may be bait, but we don't have to be sitting ducks. We've got a map of their terrain here, and surely there's more to be got out of Kaiser. I seem to remember the words he ended on last were, I know. At the risk of another splitting headache, I suppose we'd better try and get him to elaborate.
Sharon had managed to fall asleep for a while, and was woken by the sound of machinery. The lift was moving. Panic blanked her mind as she realised she was going up. The lift clanked to a halt, and a torch beam was waving in front of her, close by, on the other side of the mesh door.
Sharon, are you okay?
Zig whispered.
Just tell me you're all right.
I seem to be, said Sharon unsteadily.
I'm getting you out of there. You hold the torch. Somebody gave me this little doover for opening locks with.
Sharon grasped at the barrel of the torch, which helped to steady her hands. At first all she wanted to see with it was a familiar face. Zig was wide-eyed and pale. She was holding something that looked a bit like one of those keys you used on a sardine tin.
Here,
Zig said, pointing to a place on the lift door where Sharon could see an old keyhole.
Give me some light just here.
She began poking at the lock, jiggling the pick this way and that, but nothing happened. With each repeated attempt, Zig pressed herself closer into the wire mesh, pushing the lift to the back of the shaft.
What's it? Sharon burst out. There's a gap. You fall in the gap.
Zig pulled away, and the lift swung forward.
Maybe it will work from the inside. You try.
Sharon swapped the torch for the lockpick, which she examined closely. Better get this right, or both of them were going to end up in a heap a very long way down there. It was just a piece of stiff wire, with a twist at the hooked end. She felt around the edges of the keyhole, which was big enough to fit the tip of her little finger. "I watched my stepdad put a lock on the door of the shed," she said. "I think the actual mechanism's underneath the keyhole. In here." She tapped the metal plate. Zig held the torch at an angle, so the light came from just above the lock. Sharon worked the hooked end of the pick into the round part of the keyhole until it engaged in the groove, then slid it carefully downwards, flicking it sharply at the base of the keyhole. There was a distinct clunk, but the pick seemed to be stuck. She was sweating, holding for dear life to the little piece of wire, so it bit into the flesh of her fingers.
"That's it," said Zig. "Now just keep pulling."
Sharon took a breath and gave a sharp tug. The pick flew from her hand into outer space and down the shaft, but as she burst into tears, the door swung open. They'd put Kaiser in the holding cells next to a particularly noisy drunk, so the two of them could fight it out on the decibel count. "How are you today, Kaiser John?" Steve greeted him breezily. "Sorry you've had to suffer the ravings of the brain-dead all night. I know you're a man with standards when it comes to entertainment. I'm afraid that sort of company's par for the course when you get yourself banged up in one of Her Majesty's prisons. I'm told you get used to the social life in there over time. You sort of settle into the daily banality of it. You know, blokes whose idea of bucking the system is spitting porridge around." As Steve continued with the sketch of prison life, detailing its approach to fashion and hairstyling, Bryony could see Kaiser's face struggling to regain its hard set, but not quite making it. There was a different kind of tension about him this morning, that of someone confronting an unfamiliar reality. "What a sad end to a career of revolutionary fire and brimstone," Steve said. "Course it all depends on whether we can make these charges stick. Police evidence will be crucial, which is where our colleague Nick comes in. If he was to explain yesterday's incident along the lines that you were trying to help us with our inquiries, that might give things a different complexion. He allowed a pause for the idea to sink in before pushing it further. I mean, there might be limits to how far you want to go with this deaf business, mightn't there? Just because you've got a swastika on the side of your head doesn't mean you want to be part of the killing game, does it? Swastika's a symbol that can mean all kinds of things. I'm told in some cultures it's a symbol of life. Steve leant forward, lowering his voice. Life's a whole lot better, John, when you're not in jail. Another pause. Steve made a play of looking through his notes. Yesterday, you were telling us you know about the purpose behind all this tag and bobtail game the Suddens are playing with the police. You might be able to explain what me and my colleague here, D.I. Williams, are doing on death row. See, we're quite okay people, really, close up. We're not even completely brain dead. Kaiser John's chest heaved. They couldn't give a stuff about you. The Walker's their thing. You're just a way they can get connected to him. He showed no signs of wanting to elaborate. You know, said Bryony, we paid a visit to the Walker very recently, and I'd say if anyone was an example of being brain dead, he's it. He's flatlined, John. He's completely vacant. There wouldn't be any point trying to impress him. They see it different. Kaiser's chest heaved again, and he gave a single explosive cough. From their point of view, the Walker is out and about. How's that, then? Asked Steve. Got our own Walker. Steve dived in again. Our own. Just watch your pronouns there, John. Don't you mean their own? After all, you're not subscribing to this loony stuff, are you? Anyway, carry on. They got their own Walker. Someone's inherited the role, have they? So? Simon Oliver, Bryony offered. Oh? Kaiser bristled. Never heard of him. Sol's name is Simon Oliver. Anyway, never mind about that for now. Sol thinks he's the Walker. Is that what you're telling us? He's got the Walker's face. Oh, yes, said Bryony casually. The life mask, taken in Brixton by a man called Lenny Dignall. So he gave it to Sol, did he? What happened to Lenny Dignall? Kaiser jabbed a fist at his throat and made a gurgling noise. Someone done him in, Steve interrupted. Sol killed Lenny Dignall? How? With a spike. Spike or spoke? Steve shot back. A spoke. A bicycle spoke. It was there, just lying on the ground, and he picked it up and got him through the neck with it. Nobody knew what was going to happen. It was like, soon as he put the face on, something got into him. Nobody knew it was going to happen, Bryony repeated. So how did you all get involved? Kaiser looked them in the eye for the first time. Because that's what the Suddens are supposed to be about, innit? Sudden death. So they made it part of the act. That's how they got rid of the body. Incinerated it. This is Sol and... who else? Steve asked. Flack. Johnny Mulligan. Johnny's the one who got hooked on the Walker in the first place. They're his heroes. Charles Manson, the Walker, Ian Brady, not Christie. No, Steve smiled. Wrong image, eh? Suit, bald head, specs, little terraced house. Let's get back to this Sol character. What can you tell us about him? He's off the planet. I thought it was a freak thing, what happened to Dignall, and they had to cover it up. But I didn't know about what he was going to do to that bloke up in Hampstead. Maybe Sol didn't know either. For somebody who doesn't know what he's doing, said Steve, he seems to have an awful lot of accomplishments. Do you know what he's planning for today? No! Kaiser barked the word with sudden volume. I'm out of it. I told them I'm out of it. I'm just doing the vocals. Steve pressed on. But they couldn't let you be out of it, could they? You know too much to be out of it. So what do you know about the concert today? I'm not in it. They claim to be planning a live death act. What does that mean?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, my guess is pretty good, said Steve. I'd say they had a victim lined up. Oh.
Maybe it was going to be me. But that wouldn't be all. Make the show bigger. I've heard Flack say that a few times.
Meaning?
They want to light more than one wick.
Suppose they've somebody then. Where would this person be now? Kaiser squirmed.
I don't know. I'll be guessing.
Then guess, John.
They be kept under.
Under where? Steve fired back. The cemetery?
Or the factory.
They called a halt to the interview at 11:55 a.m. with a long list of key questions yet to be explored. They simply could not afford to spend any more time that way, with the performance due to start in only 2 hours' time. The new developments had to be reported to C1, but since Chalmers was himself out at Highgate, there was no one immediately available to command a turnaround. Messages had to be relayed back and forth, with the risk that the force of the case for redeployment wouldn't be communicated. Fortunately, there were no such difficulties in getting help from the security manager at the power station. He had only a small number of staff on site, but was ready to assist with any search operation or to advise on access and underground facilities. Steve made preliminary arrangements with him, while Bryony did a quick stocktake of the CID and patrol staff available, and called them together for a briefing at 12:30, leaving only 10 minutes for the action plan to be thrashed out.
"The question is," said Steve, "do we take Kaiser with us?"
No, he's too much of a liability. Bryony was studying the tunnel drawings. We can get the orientation we need from these.
Possibly. But I'm wondering if we can use Kaiser in another way to attract attention.
Whose attention?
Theirs. It's a high-risk strategy, I admit, but look.
He stood beside her, leaning over the array of pages on the desk.
It's a labyrinth, and the buildings above it are bloody vast. You could lose a football team just in one of those ancillary buildings at the back. We'd be hard-pressed to organise an effective stakeout, even if we had all the personnel up at Highgate. We'll have to concentrate on a restricted area and try to get them to come to us.
We set a trap.
Exactly.
Kaiser makes a row, and the others make towards him, to shut him up or worse. All right, Steve, I can see how you're thinking.
We use 93 Lots Road as a base, and we surround this area.
He circled the section of tunnel running along the north side of the road under the houses and crossing into the factory.
We've confirmed with the power station that this is a lift shaft, and if anyone's being held captive, it's here, according to the drawing. So this is where we have to be. We use Kaiser to create a racket that, with any luck, will bring the other Suddens to a rapid assembly, and we arrest them.
Sounds very neat and tidy.
Don't be so sceptical. I suppose you're going to tell me about your gut feeling now.
Yes, I am, she flared up. How many times have we picked this wrongly, Steve? I suppose you're intending to be down there yourself, right in the middle of it all.
I'll have to be, but you don't. In fact, we'll need you to be above ground, somewhere in direct communication with the control room. We need you in a car, but not Dennis as usual. They'll spot that a mile off.
Dennis appeared in the doorway.
It's 12:30, Mom. Everyone's waiting in there.
I tried to get you earlier, said Zig, but they were all in the workshop. They deferred the lift coming up. They're after me as well, see? Johnny Mulligan knows it's us that went through his bedroom.
Sharon realised Zig was in as much of a bad state as she was herself, and there was no point in playing any blame games. They clung to each other's wrists as they made their way through the passages to get as far out of range of the house as possible before attempting to surface. They missed a turn somewhere, and for a while were lost, taking it in turns to hold the torch as they went through an endless series of identical-looking tunnels. Eventually, they passed some familiar graffiti. "Live without dead time." From that point, they followed the writing on the wall. "Your future is behind you. A time to die. The second coming." The ground was sloping upwards now, and was concreted. Sharon saw an old shoe lying there and remembered nearly falling over it the first time they came down the steps from the factory outbuilding. She directed the torch beam at her feet. There were 22 steps, she remembered that, and after the first 10, a flickering light was visible above. Sharon was leading the way, and as her head reached the level of the opening, she could see flaming torches high up in the space. Risking another step up, she looked around the space. The centre of the building was dominated by a scaffolding frame draped with lengths of chain. Chain was also used to bind the torches in place, dozens of them, set at different levels so that the whole place was aglow with fiery light. She and Zig ran up the steps and backed swiftly to the nearest wall, making for the open door. But as they reached it, they heard movement outside. They could see shadows just outside the door, so they reversed direction and headed towards the ladder that led up to the bridge on the other side of the building. It was quite a climb, and as Sharon looked down on the apparatus prepared for the show, she remembered the first time she'd seen the Suddens in concert, and how she'd thought it was real when the guy in the hippie wig was hoisted up in the air, doing his maniac dance in the air. Now it was the other way round. People were going to think it was a stunt, when it was for real. The Suddens no longer meant crazy excitement to her. She could see the loops of chain right up there amidst the flames, ready to be fixed round someone's arms and legs, so they would hang there, unable to make themselves heard above the racket, while everyone laughed to see them set alight. As they reached the upper door, 2 people entered the space downstairs and began talking. But she didn't hear what they said. All she wanted was to get out into the free air. Chapter 49. Bryony was with Leonie and Dennis in an old blue Austin, stationed at the intersection of Lots Road and Chelsea Harbour Drive. They had a view of the factory yard across the creek to the left, as well as straight ahead along the street. The control room confirmed that the other cars were in place along the side streets, with more backup at the ready from the patrol cars in the King's Road. 3 plainclothes officers were sent in as pedestrians, to be in range of the house if there were any sudden developments. At 1:33 she gave the order for the cordon across the street. The next 2 minutes stretched out blankly, punctuated only by the exit of a group of elderly men from the pub on the corner. They looked suspiciously at the cordon and went on their way in the other direction. At 1:35 the sound began, only just audible from where they were, but the fluctuating pitch carried on the still hot air until the whole street seemed to be resonating. Doors opened in several of the houses, and some women actually came out and began a conversation on the pavement, their heads turning this way and that. Kaiser kept it up for several minutes, rising to a crescendo that was like the bellowing of some strange, trapped beast. Then everything seemed to stop. The women returned to their houses, and the street was silent again. Sharon refused to go back into the building, so they stayed by the wharf, dangling their bare feet over the muddy edge of the river. Zig was hunched forward, staring across the water.
"The face you saw in the house," she said. "That wasn't Sol." "Don't talk crap. You know who makes those masks. It was grinning right in my face just before they put the blindfold on me." Zig shook her head. "I know Sol better than anyone, and I know that's not him. He's a complete bloody innocent, that's the truth of it. When the visions are happening, he doesn't actually see most of what's going on around him, and sometimes he doesn't know what he's doing. But when he's in his right mind, he wouldn't hurt a fly. It was him that rescued the cat from down here in the Thames. It was struggling along at the edge of the river with its fur all matted, nothing but skin and bones, couldn't even meow. He brought it back and took care of it. Annie rescued me from my horrible boarding school when they sent me back there last year. Drove all the way up in a car he'd pinched and parked it at the edge of the hockey field.
You know very well he's killed people, Sharon said quietly. You're protecting him because you're struck on him. Don't you even realise he was going to kill me? And very likely you as well. Wake up, can't you?
Who got you out of it, Sharon?
Sharon was dropping pebbles into the mud. Yeah, and who got me into it in the first place? That was when the noise started up.
It's Kaiser.
Zig jumped to her feet.
What's he playing at? Nothing's supposed to happen for another 20 minutes.
They made their way back towards the storage building, but as they were about to climb the outside staircase, the door at the top opened and someone came out. They retreated to the shadow of the wall under the bridge and listened to the steady rhythm of the descending footsteps, punctuating the muffled howl that was coming from God knows where. Dennis shuffled in his seat, adjusting the rear-view mirror for the umpteenth time. Bryony exchanged glances with Leonie. Had it all misfired? One of the CID pedestrians, a tall man, dressed in nondescript jeans and T-shirt, was checking his watch as he crossed the street near number 93. So his back was turned when Bryony noticed another movement, some swift play of light and shadow at ground level, half obscured by a parked lorry. A man had appeared from nowhere, right in the middle of the pavement, and was running by the wall towards the entrance to one of the side yards of the power station. Dennis had seen it too, and intercepted Bryony as she was about to dash out. "Stay there," he pleaded. He set off in a chase himself at an unconvincing pace. But now the officer in the street was alert, and two of the cars were converging on the yard entrance with their sirens blaring. There were shouts, more neighbours appeared in the street, and some kids on bikes had to be redirected up Overdale Road, one of them nearly colliding with Dennis. And then the most banal of all scenes in police work. A young man, dishevelled and struggling, shepherded to a waiting car with his hands behind his back. Barely a minute later, the front door of number 93 opened, and the same scene was repeated. The second man was spitting expletives at everyone within range, and by the set of his jaw, the skeletal angles of his body, Bryony knew it was Flack. As the cars departed, there was some spontaneous clapping from amongst the now considerable throng of police gathered in the street. Not the kind of audience the two showmen had in mind when they made their plans for today, she thought. But the show was far from over. She was on the alert, scanning the scene in the other direction, towards the creek, while Leonie reported the developments to control. As Dennis returned to the car, sweating and triumphant, Bryony was already on her way down to the factory yard.
"This way," she called out to him. "Get the other cars round here."
People had gathered inside the high wire fence of the yard. Punks, all kitted out in leather, tartan and rotting cotton, with their hair jagged up for the occasion. They must have got in around the back, across the strip of waste ground between the creek and the river. The security officers from the power station appeared, exclaiming angrily and ready to take immediate action. Bryony pulled them aside, out of sight of the trespassers. "Wait," she said. "We don't know what might be happening in there. We have to coordinate this." Sharon had only seen Sol once before, without his fancy face on anyway. But this time, too, there was no doubt who it was. His pale hair was long and curling. His clothes were white, and he stood there at the river's edge, looking out over the water as if he'd just landed from some other world. Certainly you'd never have picked him for someone who belonged with the punks. Zig's reaction wasn't at all what Sharon expected. Instead of rushing out to him, she stayed back and was watching from a distance. Suddenly there was more noise, an outburst of sirens coming from the direction of the street behind them. Sol showed no response whatsoever, even when Flack's voice could be heard quite distinctly, crowing an assortment of curses. The sirens passed away, and there was quiet again. Sharon turned to Zig. "Now what?" she said. "Aren't you going to talk to him?" Zig shook her head. "Why not?"
I dunno. He doesn't seem the same."
"How do you mean?" Sharon asked. "You were just telling me you know him better than anybody. You're not scared of him, are you?"
I dunno.
When Sol moved off again, making his way along the edge of the river, past the wharves and into Cheney Walk, both of them followed. Bryony divided the remaining officers into 3 contingents, 2 to skirt the building from opposite directions, and 1 to occupy the foreground, controlling the exodus. The security officers unlocked the gates, and she led the way in. There was much hostile staring, and a couple of token war cries, but for once the surprise factor was in favour of the police. Bryony scrambled up on a stack of timber and introduced herself with as much voice projection as she could manage.
"The show's off," she announced. "Nothing's happening here, so you can go home. If you leave now, there'll be no action against you. But you are all trespassing, and we won't hesitate to make arrests if there's any trouble."
"Bollocks!" came a lone voice. There was scattered laughter, but a piece of the crowd had already broken off and was drifting out through the gates. Bryony waited, staring out the remainder of the mob until they too began to crumble into bored individuals, ready to look elsewhere for a thrill. The security officers had turned their attention to the doors of the building. "Problem," said one of them as she approached. "Someone's put the bloody bar across on the inside." "That's not supposed to be used, that bar," said the other. "It's an old locking system that no one's allowed to touch. Well, we've got 2 choices now. We can cut through it, or we can get in up the top there." "Is there a way from underneath?" Bryony asked.
"Probably, though I don't know one that's in use. Until a couple of years ago, this was an unloading dock for coal supplies, and some of it was transported through the tunnels under here. But we're switching to natural gas, so everything's changed. This building's turning into a bit of a white elephant. There's not much work goes on in there now."
"We'll try getting in from above," Bryony intercepted crisply. One of the security officers stayed below, and the other led the way up the outside stairs. It was a challenging climb in the heat, and as Bryony stepped through the metal door onto the narrow platform inside, with its token safety rail, the scene below seemed to turn dizzily before her eyes. Several dozen burning torches were arranged on a tower of scaffolding that reached almost to where she stood. The top bars were oiled, so they shone darkly, and several lengths of chain were wound over them, the ends trailing into the emptiness below. She had never been prone to vertigo, but she had to lean back against the wall for a few seconds to steady herself, before deciding on the next move. The view of the ground was obscured by smoke. So much for her hope of getting a vantage point so they could see who was in there. They'd have to go down, and with one member of the Sudden still on the loose, descent single file on the metal ladder was risky. The sound of more feet tramping up the steps outside heralded the arrival of the rest of her team. But the security officer barred the entrance with an outstretched arm. "We can't have everyone lining up along here. It's not designed to support more than a couple of men." Bryony moved forward and put her foot on the ladder. "We're going down." At ground level there was no smoke, but the light was partial and deceptive. She got her back to the nearest wall and watched anxiously as the other officers descended, directing them to form a search line. They spread out across the interior, advancing 1 pace at a time so as to check every part of the floor area. Satisfied that there was no one present, they turned their attention to the subfloor access. This time, Leonie persuaded Bryony to stay put, and it was Dennis who led the search contingent down the steps. The security officer was inspecting the scaffolding. "Professional job," he remarked. "They've done all the bracing correctly. Better get those torches put out."
The updraft from that hole in the floor would cause havoc if the flame took.
Bryony was getting her own sense of the skill and planning behind this piece of apparatus. "We have to get it photographed before we interfere with it," she said. She sent Leonie in quest of a socker with a camera, then put her gloves on and crouched to examine the floor area. It was coated with thick dust, marked with the impress of many feet. Sorry, Pavan, she thought. No chance of preserving this lot from contamination, not when the masquerader must still be lurking. The best she could do was scan for obvious pieces of evidence. Something glinted amidst the debris at the foot of the scaffolding. She reached for it. A bicycle spoke, with a sharpened end. Who was this prepared for? "Nasty, that," said a voice right behind her. She wheeled round to face the security officer. "We're not completely immune to heart attacks in our lane of business," she said. "And you should watch your back as well. These things can be lethal when they get in the wrong hands." "Hey!" Dennis made a reappearance from the lower regions, holding up an old shoe. "How about this? Think I found a match for the Batsy foot." By the end of the afternoon, Lucan Place was bursting at the seams with police of all ranks and designations. It was standing room only in Fletcher's office, where several conversations were taking place at once. Chalmers was talking to Steve, Pavan to Fletcher, Aidan to Jimmy. Bryony didn't want to talk to anyone right now except Gareth, and she didn't want to get caught up in the buzz. Once a case had broken like this, there were usually a few hours of buzz and hum as everyone recapped on the critical stages. Then they would go for a drink. She drew Fletcher aside and excused herself, saying she needed to go back to the hotel and freshen up. He wasn't about to argue with that request, only muttering the usual stuff about taking someone with her. She wondered how Gareth would feel about a few C1 personnel as company for dinner. No one noticed her pushing back through the crowded CID room to leave the building alone. With the freedom of the streets again, she took the opportunity for a walk around Belgravia to clear her head before returning to the hotel. She felt fine, she decided, as she fronted up to the little mirror in her room. Wrung out, tacky from the heat, a bit puffed, but fine. Gareth would be here in an hour.
"We've lost him."
Sharon stopped, catching Zig's elbow and trying to stop her too. Zig shook herself free and disappeared round the next corner, but Sharon couldn't run any more. She bent over, clutching at the stitch in her side, and heaving deep breaths. They hadn't been running fast, but had kept up a vigorous pace for what must have been at least an hour. Sol had his own way of moving around, alternating between phases of slow meandering and sudden darts, until, that is, he broke into a sudden charge and led them in a series of loops around the back streets. Somewhere near the Brompton Hospital, he disappeared from sight, and they'd done a complete run-around, splitting up to skirt round the hospital from opposite directions, before they caught a glimpse of him sauntering across the main road and causing a bus to veer off course as he stepped into its path. They crossed after him, only to see him double back, shooting across the stream of traffic like a cat. That was the last time they saw him. They'd cantered around every block in the area, past the police station twice, and now Sharon had had enough. Seeing a little island of green at the end of the street, she went over and sat on the grass, wondering where exactly she was. The houses were all spruced up around here, freshly painted with black railings around them. Some of the taller ones were hotels. Some had ornate boutique signs hanging above the windows. Sharon watched a woman clipping along in high heels, swinging a shiny black handbag. The streets around were silent again, until she saw another woman, who was somehow familiar, with long straight hair and jeans, whose rubber-soled shoes made no sound. She went into one of the hotels opposite. Then something else moved, white and swift at the edge of Sharon's field of vision. As she whipped round, it had disappeared, but Zig was sprinting around the corner in chase. Bryony put on the electric jug and went through her suitcase looking for something to change into. The espadrilles were unceremoniously crammed into a corner. The short skirt and floaty shirt had got bundled together with some unwashed T-shirts, and the belt was tangled up at the bottom with the necklace. She laid them out and did her best on the creases with steam from the jug. It was a soothing task, and she took her time over it. Leonie had left her sponge bag in the bathroom, stuffed with all the things Bryony had neglected to provide for herself. Body lotion, shampoo and conditioner, perfumed soap, eyeshadow. She turned her face up to the cascading water and massaged the sweet-smelling lotions through her hair, feeling the lather sliding down over her body. Then she stepped out, wrapping the towel securely under her arms, and scuttled back to her room. The door swung behind her, as if of its own accord. She froze. The surface of her skin seemed to know it before the realization formed itself in her mind, before any of her other senses picked up the signal. There was another presence, here in the room with her, waiting for her to turn and look. It wanted to be seen, so she must refuse it that gratification. The one thing she must not do was turn to face it, even as it was poised to strike. The sketch of the figure with its raised arm flashed before her mind. "I know," she said quietly. "I know who you are." She could detect the faint odour of rubber. "And I know what you look like. I've seen the pictures, your pictures." Her voice caught in her throat, and she tried to steady her breathing, counselling herself, "Take your time, take your time. I've seen your pictures. You're quite an artist, Sol. That is your name, isn't it?" "No." The word was spoken lightly, almost casually. "You'd prefer to be called Walker?" No answer. "What about Blake?" She flinched, as there was some kind of movement behind her, then steadied herself again, gripping the towel with whitened knuckles. He was there, right at the edge of her peripheral vision. Careful to avoid turning her head, she also registered that the door had not fully closed behind him. "So!" There was an urgent shout from somewhere outside the room, and his reaction was instantaneous. She found herself in a tight hold, a hand over her mouth and another across her breasts as the face came searching for hers. With a sharp twist, she managed to pull away, but that was a mistake, because now she was looking up into the vacant eyes, at the raised arm with its lethal point. Chapter 50. Zig was interviewed first. Sharon was told that she was a minor, which meant she had to have a parent with her before she could be questioned. And evidently there wasn't any way out of it. So she had to sit and wait for her mother, anticipating big dramas of a kind she just didn't want to be part of anymore. The friendly policewoman, called Leonie, offered to put her in a separate room so they could have a private reunion. But Sharon said it was no big deal, and she'd prefer to just stay in the main waiting area. All the same, when she saw her mum walk through the door, clutching Debbie against her shoulder, she almost burst into tears. Mum looked really nervous, but Debbie squirmed to the floor and ran straight for Sharon. She climbed on her knee, fascinated by the safety pin in her ear, which of course she had to try and pull out. Mum sat one seat away, using the place between them for the bag with all Debbie's stuff in it.
"I didn't have anyone to leave her with," she said. "They told me they could get her looked after while you're being interviewed."
She looked at Sharon, then put out a hand and stroked her shoulder awkwardly.
"What have you done to yourself?"
"Nothing." Sharon tried to make herself smile, but it didn't really work. "I'm okay. Everything's perfectly fine. That's not how I'd see it. Mum glanced uneasily round the room, where uniformed police were coming and going amidst the people slumped in chairs who looked as if this was the last place on earth they wanted to be. I got such a shock when that policewoman knocked on the door. There was an awkward silence between the two of them, in which Debbie participated, looking from one face to the other. Then she suddenly let out a squawk, twisted to the floor, and began to smack at Sharon, shouting, "Naughty Dell! Naughty Dell! Naughty Dell!" Sharon captured her wrists, while Mum fossicked in the bag and came out with a juice bottle. "Shush!" she commanded. "Here, have this." Debbie grabbed the bottle in both hands and ran off, gathering attention from around the room as she shrieked and giggled. "How long's she been walking?" asked Sharon. "Since a couple of days after you left. Once they start, you know they're away in no time. I remember it was just like that with you." There was another awkward silence as they both watched Debbie performing in the centre of the room. Then Mum said quietly, "You are coming home now, aren't you, Sharon?" "No, Mum, I'm not coming back. I've got a place to live, and I've got good friends." Her mother sniffed. "Friends don't stick by you like family, don't they? There's a friend I have to stick by. She's going to need me around." "You're sure she's not mixed up in this horrible business? You seem to have got yourself into a very dangerous crowd." "It's not like that," said Sharon firmly. "They're not just a crowd. The people are all different. Some of them are nice, and some of them aren't. But I like it. It's where I belong." Debbie ran back, deposited her bottle in her mother's lap, and ran off again, full tilt, coming a cropper halfway across the room. Sharon went over and swept her up, swinging her around as she brought her back. "We can meet sometimes, if you want," she said, "for a coffee or something, but I'm not coming to the house." "I'm sad about your nice hair." Mum put a hand on her shoulder again. "Is there anything you need?" "Not really." "They told me you saved that woman's life." "We only just heard that ourselves. We thought we might have been too late. I tried to stop the bleeding, but I didn't know how, and it seemed ages before the ambulance got there." "Sharon?" Leonie appeared, carrying a folder. "We're ready to talk to you now." Chapter 51. "Logan Royce," said Gareth. "Can't say I know the name. I've picked up a copy of Beaten Tracks occasionally, but it's not really my end of the trade." Bryony thumped him lightly on the arm. "You're a snob, that's your trouble. If you were content to be a hack, you'd get plenty of work here in England. You wouldn't have to go back to Paris, chasing up commissions in the foreign language glossies." "I'm not going back to Paris." She grasped his arm and hugged it. "Oh, look, I didn't mean that. I know it's important for you to make your name." "Well, I did mean it. I'm not going back. Not if..." "If what?" "If we're staying together. I've been through purgatory the last 2 weeks, Bry, thinking it was all over. It's got my priorities sorted. I want us to live together." They were walking around the Serpentine in Hyde Park, watching the paddle boats. She was longing for a swim, but that was forbidden for another 3 days, until the dressing was removed from the wound. It was a superficial injury. The spoke had caught on a rib and failed to penetrate, and the two girls had tackled her assailant before he could strike again. They had quite a story to tell, those two, but for once she'd decided to leave it to Steve to wrap things up in the interview room, contenting herself with a second-hand account. "I've been sorting some priorities too," she smiled at him. At this rate, neither of us will have a job. We'll become a pair of London layabouts, shall we? Spend our days in the parks and our evenings in front of the telly? There's no need for you to give up your job, Bri. I'd be in good company. Aidan's leaving the Met, wants to go back into the music scene. It's funny, you know. He's a brilliant cop, but he doesn't walk like a cop. He walks like a muso. I had a hunch he'd jump ship sooner or later, but I didn't expect it to be quite so soon. I feel a bit responsible. I mean, it was me that got him into the undercover job, and this case seems to have spun him out. What about you, then? He buried a hand in her hair and drew her head towards his shoulder. You've been through the ringer, girl. Losing Macready has been a big shock. But the other dramas, I suppose you get used to them. Maybe that's how life is supposed to be for me. That's what Macready said the last time I saw him. He said it was something he and I had in common, that it was our calling to fence in the darkness. But now I'm thinking I might have to leave it, for a while at least. She was about to broach the subject that she'd still not quite managed to bring up, when their attention was distracted by peals of crazy laughter from some kids on the lake. "Hey!" she said. "I want to go on one of those paddle boats." Belinda Audio hopes you enjoyed the reading of The Calling, written by Jane Goodall and read by Nikki Paul. If you would like further information about Belinda Audio, please visit our website www.belinda.com.